Information for us as well. It's been interesting too. We did a lot yesterday with the lead up, the opening statements, the laying out of the arguments from both the government side and the defense team for Judge Hannah Dugan. Today we're getting more of that, but it's kind of into the nitty gritty of how the government is trying to lay out its approach to their case. And in cross-examination, we're starting to see what the defense is trying to do to poke holes, to start to chip away at those different witnesses.
One of the things that stood, a small detail, but it stood out to me is we're hearing from all of these FBI special agents. And I guess one of the first things I thought was, I didn't know how heavily the FBI was involved in ICE removal operations. And one of the witnesses said, well, I don't think they were. I don't think the FBI was until the Trump administration. So the FBI now plays a heavy role in some of these ICE removal operations, and that's why we're hearing from all of these FBI special agents who are part of this task force who were at the courthouse that day.
We're going to get you caught up on all of it over the next few hours and get you by the moment testimony as well. So if you weren't here with us yesterday, basically how we're doing this, because it's a federal trial, no video or audio recording allowed inside. We've hit that point home a number of times. What we have is our team of reporters there at the federal courthouse in downtown Milwaukee. So multiple reporters, some of whom we'll hear from over the next few hours. Our Ted Perry, Fox 6 anchor, is in the courthouse as well. But we have a number of different people relaying what is happening on that witness stand to us so that we can bring it to you, and you can kind of follow along moment by moment with this trial throughout the day.
You know, I really, in listening to, as we're hearing from one of these officers after another who's testifying, 6 agents that were there that day, you see what a heavy lift this one arrest was. A lot of planning went into this. And there were some questions already asked about, you know, why didn't you arrest him in the car on the way? And it hadn't struck me until, you know, we've seen the video of Eduardo Flores Ruiz running outside the courthouse where they track him down. One thing you notice is it's raining. And one of the things we heard from one of the FBI special agents testifying today was they hadn't had a positive ID of him on the way to the courthouse. One of the reasons they did not make the arrest before he came to the courthouse.
They did have, I believe it was said, agents and vehicles outside of his residence that were trying to positively ID him and monitor that as, I guess, potentially an option, or at least to say, yes, he has left his house. They saw a person leave that building, get in a vehicle and drive away, but because of the rain that morning, at least according to this testimony, not able to say for sure that that was Eduardo Flores
And
Ruiz.
that underscores what I said yesterday, which is that's why courthouses are attractive to someone who's trying to make an arrest like this, because when the person shows up for their hearing, they identify themselves. I'm here for this hearing. It's my hearing, this date, this time. So it is convenient in that way. But we know that even before this happened, even before the incident on April 18th, just I think 12 days before that, Chief Judge Carl Ashley had put out a press release saying there have been a couple of arrests in the courthouse. He raised concerns about the sort of interference with court operations. It was already a concern that ICE was doing this. So you get to April 18th, and obviously tensions were heightened.
All of that is kind of the bigger picture issues around the actual person who is on trial, right? Judge Hannah Dugan, who's in that image behind us here. She has been mentioned multiple times, of course, as these officers have been on the witness stand today. Specifically the fact that she came out with another judge there at the Milwaukee County Courthouse on April 18th, but that she was the one doing the most talking. She was the one engaging with those agents from those different law enforcement organizations, and that she was the one who, in a number of the different testimony we've heard, had a feeling where it was almost like an order, is how the agents reported. It felt like an order from Judge Dugan to go to Chief Judge Carl Ashley's offices once it became apparent that they were there to conduct an immigration arrest. Some of the things that we've heard from those officers already is the fact that she seemed visibly angry, according to the testimony from those officers, and that, again, the fact that she appeared in her robes made them know, okay, this is a judge here at the courthouse, even though others who are familiar with that courthouse and have testified on the stand today say it was not common to see a judge in official robes in those public hallways.
And I think that so much of that is about painting that picture. If she was upset, she's in a robe, she's trying to show sort of, it's a show of force or a show of authority. That goes into what the government is trying to prove, which is her mindset at the time. Of course, the defense will look at that and probably try to say, was that really unusual? Is there anything wrong with a judge wearing the robe into the hallway? Was she really that angry? When you look at the surveillance video, there's no sound. So we can't hear her tone of voice. You have to sort of look at gestures and expressions. And she's not yelling at anyone. She doesn't seem to be enraged visibly, but what was her demeanor, what was her tone of voice, and that's hard to tell from those.
We're already starting to hear some of the terms we used yesterday, too, and we'll get you another explanation if you missed that with Julius Kim, one of our legal experts who'll join us later. The difference between an administrative warrant and a judicial warrant. Judge Dugan reportedly asking those agents what they had, saying they did not have a judicial warrant. They did have an administrative warrant, which comes from law enforcement, an immigration warrant in this case. And all of this happening, again, at this interesting period of the calendar where the Trump administration, starting in late January when the second term began, had ramped up these different arrests and immigration enforcement around the country. And there were so many questions about what could or could not happen on a local level, like at a state courthouse.
I think what's clear from the testimony so far is that the ICE agents knew coming in that they were not going to be likely to find a cooperative or welcoming courthouse in terms of the staff and the judges, because there had already been discussion about, are we just agents of ICE? The chief judge raising sort of alarm bells that the Trump administration is doing this. And so one of the, I don't know which witness it was, but was asked about when Eduardo Flores Ruiz was first arrested for the criminal charge that he was there in court for. Did they get any notification at the time? Because they already knew he was someone who had been deported prior.
Yeah, back in 2020.
Did they get notice at the time? Like, why did they wait till the hearing? Well, they didn't get notice at the time that he had been arrested because there wasn't sort of a cooperation, I guess, from the county on ICE detainers. So they didn't hear about that. They eventually learned that.
We are getting, again, those updates by the moment here. We just got word from our Bill Miston at the courthouse. 12:05, they break for lunch, so they won't be back until 12:50. This is kind of a perfect chance for us to regroup a little bit, get you caught up on what has happened inside that federal courtroom this morning. Let's go to our Ted Perry, who's been listening in to testimony throughout the day today, as he was yesterday. Ted, great to have you back here with us. And for folks who missed it yesterday, give us the layout again and just kind of the logistics of where you are, how all of this coverage is coming together for this federal trial.
Well, guys, I heard you say that we were on break, and I know that because Bill Miston just walked into the room here,
the man,
room
the myth.
150, on the first floor, and that's how I can tell. All right, this is a 5-story building, right? The trial is taking place on the 3rd floor in Judge Lynn Edelman's courtroom. On the 4th floor, in an old jury room, that's the media workroom. That's where they can see the trial on closed-circuit television. They cannot broadcast from there. We can't go right to Bill and say, Bill, what are you seeing? Can't do that. You got to come down here to the 1st floor. This is the only area in the entire courthouse where we are allowed to transmit a signal of any type. I made the analogy yesterday. It's a bit like having your washing machine on the 3rd floor and your basement in your dryer in the basement. It's not the easiest way to do things, but we're fortunate enough to be in here and do that at least. So we have a system. It's kind of an old school system. Delete, comes down to here. Christina Van Zelst is monitoring Bill's blog. I'm monitoring Bill's blog, but I'm also in an overflow room, excuse me, that also has a closed circuit television in it, but I'm not allowed to broadcast from there either. So that sets the stage. But I know Bill's doing a great job because you guys are talking as if you were watching that closed feed. So that is a testament to Bill's note-taking and your guys' ability to kind of pick out the salient points that have been happening. I want to take a little step back here if I can, because what the government is doing, they are bringing every one of those 6 agents up one by one. This was one of the FBI agents who testified this morning on cross-examination. He was presented last evening. He's the one who had to carry over. And so what they're trying to do is saying, you had a plan, right? You wanted all 6 of these. Why did you, the same questions are being asked. Why did you want to do this in the courthouse? Well, there are 6 of us in the courthouse. The defendant has gone through a screening, presumably, and we know that he did. It's a little safer. We all got there. So the defense, or what the government is trying to point this picture, that Hannah Dugan somehow blew up this plan, a plan that she might not have been privy to, clearly was not privy to, but creating this distraction of sending them all down to the Chief Judge Ashley's office. We don't know what was said. You're right, we can't hear it, but you are indeed right that these agents testified that Dugan was, quote, direct, upset, and angry, and that they did not like the fact that 4 of them were sent down to the Chief Judge's office. To quote now from Joseph Zuro, who is a CBP agent, we were in a bad spot here. And when pressed on that, what do you mean? Well, we were spread apart now. Now we had some guys down here and some guys down here. And this is a quote I couldn't say on broadcast side, but we could say it on Fox Local. And it's key here. What Zero did when he was brought down to the chief judge's office, and he asked another agent who came down, Ayers, hey, what are you doing here? Were you sent down here? No. Okay, you weren't sent down here. So I know that the judge didn't send you down here. So what he said was, quote, get your ass back in the hallway in case this guy comes out. Why is that significant? Because on a cross-examination, Jason Luzak, one of Hannah Dugan's 4 or 5 attorneys, said, really? Get your ass back in the hallway in case? That's not what you wrote in the report. That's not verbatim what you wrote in the report. And what the defense is trying to do with little things like that, guys, is point out flaws in the plan. A, you came to this courthouse and you didn't know there was a temporary plan in place for how we're going to deal with agents from the federal government. One of the agents testified, no, I did not know that. So what the defense is trying to do is just undermine the credibility of these agents one by one in the smallest of ways.
There's been a couple of those, Ted, too. I'm glad you noted that, the difference between the reports following that incident back in April versus what we're getting in court today. There was even something in one of the reports that the person had the wrong Milwaukee Police District noted, I believe, in one of the warrants for Eduardo Flores Ruiz's arrest. So some things like that, I guess, that you're noting where the defense is trying to at least bring up the question, right? All they have to do is leave some doubt in the jury's mind during that testimony.
That's exactly right. And I'm going to bring another moment here. I'm calling it, and pun intended here,
I love the
iconic
whiteboard.
moment of the day. Okay, now, excuse my, you do not want me as a Pictionary partner, I'm telling you that. But there were 2 icons. I'm going to put that down and explain what I'm going to show you here in a second. On cross-examination, there was a signal chat. Okay, now, first of all, you think Jason Luzak brought it up once. He brought it up a number of times. Was it really such a good idea for you guys to be using Signal? Remember, Signal is the same one Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth had that conversation on that led to a lot of controversy.
We were going to bring that up, Ted, as well, because that whole Signal Gate thing happens in March of last year. This arrest is happening in April, and the agents are using Signal.
In April of last year, right. But at the time, they said, was it such a good idea? Was it standard procedure? Now, Luzak called for that Signal
screenshot
brought back up again, screenshot of it, yes, because he wanted to ask about 2 particular icons that were on the chat. We all have icons, right? Mine is a picture of me at a Brewers game. We all have our own different ones, right? I guarantee you after today, a lot of federal agents are going to change their icons, and here's why. One was brought up, again, excuse the, Pictionary. It was a medicine bottle with a skull here, and instead of crossbones, they were hypodermic needles. The second one was an agent, and we're not going to try to draw this one, fellas, agent licking a gun in a suggestive manner. Not going to show you. You're going to have to use your imagination. Let's just say it's not an icon that you would want put out in the world. With other agents, with other federal agents, yeah, probably. It's the inside joke. It's the inside humor. It's the same reason the Signal chat was called frozen water. Think about it. What's frozen water?
Ice.
Ice, exactly. And Luzak said at one point, is that a joke? Is that your guys' idea of a joke? So what the defense here is doing is just sort of chipping away, not necessarily at the credibility, but the testimony of these agents.
Ted, what you just said there regarding sort of frozen water, the name, the sort of inside jokes that then, as a journalist, I think we've always been told, don't put anything down on paper, don't write the title and the name of a manila folder with anything you wouldn't want to see in court.
Right.
And here's a perfect example of it's literally showing up in court.
Right. We all have, kind of our own humor of our own nomenclature in our own lines of work. No one intended for those Signal apps to be shown anywhere. But I guarantee you, that agent who had his icon showed with him making a suggestive tongue motion toward his gun, I'm betting dollars to donuts that that icon has been changed.
Now, On the other side of this, Ted, of course, this is Judge Hannah Dugan on trial here for this. It's what she did or did not do on that morning that is at issue when it comes to this trial. One of the other bits of testimony that I thought was notable, certainly when it comes to this issue of why the arrest was happening at the courthouse in the first place, comes from our last person we've heard from here before this lunch break. That would be the ICE deportation officer, Joseph Vasconcelos. I'm going to use that name again for you, Brian, here, who said in his testimony that previous times that he has been involved in arrests, he has been shot, he has been stabbed, he has ruptured an Achilles in high-speed chases, he's had nerve damage from fighting people trying to resist arrest. So on the government side, they're also showing that, look, these agents go into these situations not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing who that subject is and how they're going to respond to a potential arrest. And in the government side of things, it seems to be laying out that this operation was going as planned basically until that moment that Judge Hannah Dugan enters the hallway and begins to confront, and as it's been kind of put, blow up that operation, moving agents back and forth versus what they were planning to do.
And there's another point to all that, too. There was testimony by a couple agents that they didn't tell the judge. You guys said before you brought me on that they don't think any judges were told. Judges were not told, right? There's no plan in place. They didn't have to necessarily tell the judges. They had to go to the chief administrative judge there. But what they did do is they reported before court opened. They went to the bailiff in room 615. That's Hannah Dugan's courtroom, room 615. And they said, hey, we're here. We're here to arrest Eduardo Flores Ruiz. By the way, do you have a recent picture of him? No, we do not. That's another thing the defense is going to pick up on. So, as if to say, you sure you had the right guy? So they went there, and then they went back in the hallway. They were never there during any court proceedings. The bailiff, we don't know how Hannah Dugan found out necessarily that ICE was there. Could have been her court reporter. That's what they said in opening statements yesterday. The bailiff went back to the agents and said, I didn't dime you out. In other words, I didn't tell the judge that you guys were here. It was sort of a law enforcement to law enforcement bond. Like, I don't know how she knew, but she didn't get it from me. And that was a point that was brought up a couple different times by a couple different agents, that the bailiff made a point to say to those guys, I didn't dime you out.
And that would be a Milwaukee County Sheriff's Department employee, right, Ted?
I believe so. I believe they
yeah.
are in charge. Brian would know a lot better than me.
Yeah, the bailiffs work for the Milwaukee County Sheriff.
Hey, if you can stick around, Ted, we do have to take a quick break, 2 minutes here on the Wisconsin Live Desk. We'd love to get into a little bit more of what popped up for you in this morning's testimony, as it is a lunch break here for the trial of Judge Hannah Dugan. We're going to do that a quick 2 minutes. We'll be right back here on the Wisconsin Live Desk. Welcome back to our special coverage of Judge on Trial, the trial of Milwaukee County Judge Hannah Dugan here, as we're on day 2 of testimony, going through a number of the different law enforcement officers involved in the operation to arrest Eduardo Flores Ruiz back in April of this year, and Judge Dugan's role in that she's now on trial for. We're going to bring back Ted Perry, who was at the federal courthouse in downtown Milwaukee listening to the proceedings this morning and some of that testimony. A lot of different things that stood out, Ted, but I'm sure you want to talk about Judge Dugan as well, being that she is the one on trial here at the center of this. What has been some of the testimony so far today that's come out about her actions, her temperament on that day?
Yeah, let's talk about that, because as we mentioned in the last segment, both agents, 3 of them in fact, have testified that she was direct, upset, and angry with their presence, and came up to them individually. A couple of the guys were in a group of 2. There were a couple of guys who were 1 by 1, and she thought she had them all and had sent them down. There were actually 6, but she was only able to send 3 or 4 down to the Chief Justice's office. Now, this is a really important point the defense made sure to bring out, or the government made sure to bring out. She came out in a robe, which is unusual. We've established that. And 2, she asked them who they were and what they were doing there. And before they could really answer, she said, "Get down to the Chief Justice's office." But you know what she didn't do? She never said, "I'm Judge Hannah Dugan." She just came out there in the robe as if to say, "I'm a judge." She brought another judge, Judge Cera, who has the courtroom next to her, standing there as if to imply, safety in numbers, right, or power in numbers, but never identified her or Judge Cera next to her. And both agents were very careful to make that point that she never identified herself, nor did they ask who she was.
Significance of that is, and her not identifying herself, was it to show that the robe itself was the point?
That's what one is to assume, right? That the point was not made that finally, but it does appear that is the point that the government was trying to make. She never quite identified herself, as if to imply she knew she might have been overstepping her bounds here, but the robe is enough, right?
I did think it was interesting, again, as we're seeing the kind of cat and mouse game between the prosecution and the defense. In cross-examination of one of those officers, I believe it was FBI Special Agent Philip Jackling this morning, Jason Luzak, the defense attorney for Judge Hannah Dugan, did bring up the point, or in cross-examination, Jackling, the agent, admitted that because they were wearing robes made it obvious, and if they weren't wearing robes, he would not have necessarily any idea what kind of authority they would have had. So it was a little bit of a back and forth there on, okay, it's uncommon that they would be wearing robes in the hallway like that, but clearly those robes made the agents know who they were dealing with.
And guys, it's funny that attire comes up, because it came up with these guys being plain clothes and the government making the same point to every agent. Why are you plain clothes? Well, we wanted to fit in. We want to blend in. It's less dramatic that way. We can kind of fit in, make the arrest, and move on. Luzak says to one of them, says to Jackling, who is the guy pictured, he has a beard, he had a beard today on the stand, but he's the taller of the agents in the brown and lighter tan checked plaid shirt, the buffalo plaid shirt. He said, "Why were you in plain clothes? We were trying to blend in." And Luzak said, "Yeah, but she did a bad job of it, because there was a defense attorney, you'll see her in the surveillance video wearing the mask, going around taking pictures of all of them, and that's what led to that signal chain that said, there's a woman taking pictures of us," and then somebody responded, "Oh, that's fun." And then that went on, and that was a reason for Luzak to bring up the signal chain.
Okay, I have to point out, Ted,
our icons.
The one thing when you look at the video and you go, how did anyone spot them? Well, first of all, there had already been a notice from the chief judge saying, ICE is in the courthouse, 12 days earlier.
There had been 2 previous arrests.
There have been 2 previous arrests, so they're on alert.
Yeah.
Public defenders are certainly looking out for it. They're the ones who I think, obviously, they spot them first. But also, if you look at the video, every one of them looks like they've been to the gym and they're wearing a ball cap. And I'll tell you, I've done a lot of undercover work in my career. And the thought that if I just throw on a ball cap, that'll do it. I will tell you a story. And this is, you guys, this is a true story. I was in Kansas City. I was doing surveillance on someone who was we were doing a series on career criminals. And I was tailing a guy, and I'm driving through a neighborhood wearing a ball cap with my short blonde hair. I'm at the time in my 40s or 30s, I don't know what it was. And as I'm driving by, someone on the sidewalk just yells out to everyone else, 5-0. police code. That's a police. I look
Which
like
is
a cop.
slang for police. By the
So
way.
all of them sitting in the hallway, every one of them wearing a ball cap. I think they stood out even in place.
Now, did you also look like you'd been
I did
hitting the
not.
gym
I
back
did. That's
then
the
in
one
the
thing I
Kansas
was
City
missing.
days, Brian?
The one
All
thing
right.
I was missing. I was
Ted,
not
let me ask you about that
gym
public
rat.
defender
Well,
because she came up a
Well,
couple
hold on.
times. Go
A
for it.
couple. What I like about that story is Brian made it a point to point out that he once had long, blonde, flowing
Well,
locks.
there's that. There's that too.
That was not then.
to the-
It was
I think-
prior to that.
I
when I had the mullet.
I
We're
think
not gonna
that's why
talk
he
about
brought
that
it up.
today. Okay.
Oh, you said it mullet. You didn't say mullet before, but you mentioned they were all blending in. You know, the one who didn't, the one who really did not, was the female agent at the end of the hallway sitting down by the garbage can.
Yeah.
She was the one who you would least likely, and not because of her gender, but because of her body language, sitting there kind of by the garbage can, almost.
And
looked
Hannah
like she was
Dugan did
waiting
not
for
notice her. That's the one
case
she
to
didn't
go.
see.
Yeah, the six
that's,
agents.
that's my point,
5
right?
of
That's
them
the
end up
that's
in
the one, and the other one, Ayers, who was not in the hallway at the time. So the 4 of them she recognized, or 3 of them she recognized and sent them down there.
Yeah.
So
But
actually,
Ayers,
I will say
did
she
not
does.
send
She does
down.
recognize 4 of them, but then the 5th one was following behind her and the 4th, and she does turn around and see him following, and she says, "Yeah, you too." So he goes into the chambers or to Chief Judge's office
her
for a
that,
brief time, but then he comes back
Yeah.
out.
Hey, Ted, while we were talking about that public
Yeah.
defender, I just wanted to make sure we explain that to people because she came up a number of different times with the different law enforcement agents and officers who were there that day. That's believed to be public defender Maura Gingrich. She's seen in a mask in some of the surveillance video, and she came up repeatedly as someone who was photographing those agents in the hallway. Why was that noted by the agents? Did that play into, again, okay, this operation is going one way and now things are starting to unravel?
It kind of goes to show that the plan, such as it was, has been blown a little bit. You know, going back to that signal chat, and I'll read it directly. The DEA Brian Ayers says, "The lady with the mask just took pics of us. Mike Gavin, that's fun." Someone else pipes in, "She knows us. Wonder if that's his legal representation." So they didn't even know who Eduardo Ruiz's attorney was or what she looked like. So that it led to some confusion on their part. Again, it just one thing after another that separates these 6, which is why Zuro said, we're in a bad spot here.
And the one agent, Joseph Vasconcelos, is that right? Actually says in that signal chat, after seeing or hearing about the pictures being taken, this is going to be a pain in the bleep. So they already see this was going to be an easy hallway arrest. Now they know we're here, and this is getting messy.
I got to say, I was not expecting to rehash all of the debate over the use of signal by law enforcement officers and members of the government like we had at the beginning of this year, but there you go.
Look,
that was a topic as well we were not expecting.
I promise you this much. It's not the last time Jason Luzek's going to bring that up. And by the way, guys, I know you can't see this trial. I know you can't hear this trial. But if the name Luzek sounds familiar, Jason Luzek is the son of longtime WKLH broadcaster Dave Luzek from the Dave and Carol show, right?
It's a who's who in that
They're
courtroom.
doppelgangers. But they're doppelgangers. If you close your eyes, you think that Dave Luzek was one of the defense attorneys for Hannah Dugan. Sounds like his father, looks like his father. It's a little bit uncanny, which led to a light moment yesterday with Luzek when he left. There's been a couple different mentions of how many microphones there are, but they're poor. So one time Judge Edelman and one time one of the jurors asked a witness or an attorney to move the mic closer. This is a cavernous building. The acoustics aren't great to begin with. But Luzek got up from an area where there was none, and they said, well, you need to use a handheld mic, and they threw him a handheld mic, and he just said, this is the moment I've been waiting for my whole life. It was kind of a nod to his old man who was always on the mic, and it was really a lighthearted moment and a pretty clever moment by Luzek in that point.
I know
right
we
there.
have to take another break, but I do want to say you mentioned the acoustics. The courtroom they are in, which we cannot see, it's a shame, is apparently one of the most beautiful courtrooms in all of the state of Wisconsin and maybe all around the Midwest. But it's also a very tall courtroom. And there were
27-foot ceilings.
There were questions about whether they should move it to somewhere with better audio and better acoustics, but Judge Edelman said, no, we're keeping it right here.
plus, there is no place. I emceed an event here many years ago for the Liver Foundation, and to be an MC in this building is torture because it just echoes all over, and people don't listen to you as an MC to begin with. Most of the time, they're at their table chatting, but throw in lousy audio and these acoustics, and that's one thing. So up at the building itself, you mentioned it, the mahogany wood, beautiful ceilings. The whole place is gorgeous. If you've never been in here, find a way to get in here. Open doors in September, or you know what I mean. It's a public building. You're allowed to come in here, but it is a gorgeous building. But it's old too, and so it's chilly in some places, warm in others. And speaking of which, warm. How's this? I'm learning the tricks of the trade here already. This is a pretty hot heater. Got here this morning. Put this down. The old turkey and cheese. It's going to be a nice patty melt by the time we're done with this segment here. So, I'm learning them.
You got to make sure you get both sides.
Well, no, Christina Van Zels was kind enough to flip it over at 10:30 for me, so she didn't want it to get
So not the most efficient heat source, but it's doing its job nonetheless.
Yeah.
This is the kind of content
it's
our
old
viewers
school, you know. You can take the boy out of Baraboo, but you can't take Baraboo out of the boy. And another thing I'm learning, guys, you got to wear the right shoes here, okay? Day one, I was walking around. Christina was showing me around the building, and I'm not sneaking up on anyone. It was great, when you walk, and then people are looking at you too. So yesterday, I wore a different pair of shoes. Those worked. I don't know why I got cute today. Went back to the old pair because now they're squeaking. And so we're learning everything a little bit as we go in this trial.
Let's just say you're not getting content like this anywhere else this week. That's for sure. Ted, you've got about 17 minutes left in the lunch break, so we want you to enjoy that patty melt, get a little bit of a break yourself, and we'll try to check in a little bit later.
It's almost ready. Why don't we open it now and see how the cheese is melted on it? Do you want to do that?
We'll take a break after we see this.
Look at that. That's melted right there.
The first federal courthouse ham and cheese.
That actually did work.
That's outstanding.
That actually.
Hey, welcome back to our coverage here on the Wisconsin Live Desk. The second day of testimony now in the trial of Milwaukee County Judge Hannah Dugan, who is charged with two different counts, a misdemeanor and a felony when it comes to concealing an individual to prevent arrest and obstruction, the events surrounding the arrest of Eduardo Flores Ruiz back in April of this year. We're trying to bring you a number of different voices and perspectives through the course of this trial. We just had our Ted Perry inside the courthouse this morning on what's actually happening morning on the witness stand. We're joined now by the sheriff for Dodge County, Dale Schmidt, who was kind enough to join us on Wake Up yesterday, kind of setting the stage for the trial, and rejoining us here on the Wisconsin Live Desk today. And Sheriff Schmidt, thank you again for being a part of this. Just to get people up to speed, you have had a long history with ICE, with Immigrations and Customs Enforcement there in Dodge County. How far back does that go, and what has the coordination been like between your sheriff's office and that organization?
Well, actually, we've had a relationship with the U.S. Marshals Service, and the immigration has been a rider on that agreement. And so we house immigration detainees as part of that U.S. Marshal contract. And it's been a very positive experience for me during my time as sheriff. We've had immigration detainees, U.S. Marshal inmates, other federal inmates from across the country here since during my tenure and beyond. I believe it started right around 2001. We're here in Dodge County. We've had that. It's been a very positive experience. Really has not yielded any negatives for our community in any way. We treat ICE as any other law enforcement entity as they are here in Dodge County.
Sheriff, I understand that what you operate there is the only ICE detention facility in the state of Wisconsin. Is that right?
Yeah, we are the only one to our size. There are other sheriff's offices that do house some immigration detainees for a short period of time, but we are the only one that holds them for a longer period of time.
With that as a backdrop, I'd be curious, much of what we've talked about in the last couple days and what has already come out in testimony during the trial has been the change, the sort of ramp up of arrests and enforcement during the early months of the Trump administration's second term in office, and some of the policy changes in January when President Donald Trump retook the White House, and then the further enforcement that we saw with different arrests at the Milwaukee County Courthouse, certainly this one that happened back in April. Has there been a noticeable change in the numbers on your end of things in this year, the first year of the Trump administration's second term?
There's been no change at all. And in fact, we're actually a little bit down from where we were earlier in the year. Our facility has been full to the immigration and U.S. Marshal standards as long as I can remember. Under President Obama, under President Biden, we actually had more people within our facility than we do right now from immigration. So it really is, it's been a constant for us.
How does that score? Oh, I'm sorry, not to interrupt you, but continue.
We've seen additional communication and contact from them, and it's been easier to get things done with them right now because it's more of a focal point, but really it's been no change for us.
How does that square with, I mean, I think the impression is that the Trump administration has ramped up immigration enforcement. Is it that other areas of the country, places maybe like Chicago or others or closer to the border, are seeing more of that than here in Wisconsin? Or is it just not the case that there have been, I mean, tell me about it, because I think the expectation would be you would have seen some huge increase in influx in arrests.
Well, my point is that we've always had immigration enforcement, and I've always been full. I can't build a new building and add room for additional detainees and inmates in my jail. I just don't have any additional room. Yeah, they would love to put more people here, but I don't have any room for it. My point is that this is continued. This isn't something new that all of a sudden we're doing immigration enforcement in the United States. We have done a lot of immigration enforcement. We've done a lot of deportations in our country throughout the years, and it is more of a focus under the Trump administration, no doubt. And places are seeing it where they hadn't before. But that doesn't mean that it hadn't been going on already under these prior administrations with the support of those prior administrations and presidents.
Still, certainly the attention on this trial and going back to the arrest of Judge Dugan back in the spring gained national attention for this part of southeastern Wisconsin, for Milwaukee specifically here. I want to play a clip with you with one of our legal experts, Julius Kim, who's joined us throughout our coverage of this, is a frequent expert that we use during high-profile trials like this, about the possible impact of a verdict. So if you don't mind, this was from the 9 p.m. news last night. Our anchor asked him, again, we're very early, we don't know which way this trial is going to go, but about the possible impact depending which way the verdict could go, and then I'd be interested in your response to that. But let's play the clip first so you can hear it.
Could this case truly have ripple effects for the rest of the country, the decision?
Yeah, I think it could, because I think that it could lend a little bit of guidance for judges. They could feel a little bit more at ease knowing that they can use some of their discretion and they're not automatically going to get prosecuted. Well, who knows? They might, but at least that there is a system in place where jurors can recognize that they might not be overreaching per se when they're trying to just make sure that the system is going safely. And if there is a not guilty verdict here, then that might have the administration at this point in time rethink some of their tactics and strategies.
So it's a little bit of an either-or answer there from Julius Kim again, but I think it plays into what we're already hearing a lot in court during this first day and a half so far, Sheriff Schmidt, when it comes to the unknowns, and especially going back to April of this year. It seems like at Milwaukee County, the courthouse, there was kind of an unclear idea of what judges were supposed to do, how immigration agents were supposed to come into a county courthouse like that. What was your response to that answer and kind of the larger issues that have come up already in this trial?
First of all, I don't know that I necessarily buy the argument that a judge didn't know what to do when all of this started. I personally think, my own opinion is that Judge Dugan knew exactly what she was doing, and knew that it was likely not, even if it wasn't illegal, it wasn't the most ethical thing to do, to actively assist someone in evading a law enforcement arrest. To me, ethically, is not appropriate. And so I'm certainly waiting to see what the result of this trial is. But at the end of the day, in a county that we pride ourselves on making sure we hold people accountable, I think it leads to a safer environment if we also hold those accountable who are holding other people accountable, and hold them to the same standard. I think that's important. If a not guilty verdict comes out, I don't know that the administration is going to change course. I would venture to guess that the administration is going to disagree, and they'll continue on course with the enforcement actions that they've already have in place. And I in Dodge County will continue to support those efforts. And if an immigration officer comes into Dodge County and needs assistance, here in Dodge County, we're going to help them.
Sheriff Schmidt, I'm a big data guy, and I like to look for data. It's hard to find sometimes localized data on immigration enforcement, but an organization called Track Immigration actually does open records requests, gets some of this in, and I was able to parse out some Wisconsin data. And to what you said a moment ago about not seeing an increase, tell me if these numbers sound similar or at least close to right. But they show the Dodge County Jail having in September of each year, these are date specific, but in September of, say, 2023, there were 117 of these immigration detainees in custody of the Dodge County Jail, 116 September of last year and 109 September of this year. Does that sound about right to you? And it does actually seem to underscore what you said about there not being any sort of dramatic increase that you've seen.
Yeah, those numbers seem very close to accurate. I mentioned yesterday when we were in the morning show, I'm talking about our actual bed days. And if you were to actually look at this year's bed days in Dodge County compared to last year's bed days, we are on pace to be approximately 1,800 bed days less than we were in 2024. And that's specifically just for those immigration detainees in my jail. And if you look back to 2014, prior to my time here as sheriff, we actually had about 25 to 30,000 more bed days of immigration detainees in the jail, and that was under President Obama. So to give you some additional data to support what you're talking about here, this has been going on for a very long time. It's not anything new because President Trump is here that we're finally deporting people.
Well, one of the new things,
more attention.
Sheriff, one of the new things seems to be the focus on courthouse arrests, which they've been allowed, but under very limited circumstances. President Trump's policy opened it up to more, and Eduardo Flores Ruiz was one example of that. I'm wondering, outside of Milwaukee County, I know you represent the Badger State Sheriff's Association. You have a long history there. Are sheriff's departments or others are other county jails or other counties seeing some of these courthouse arrests as well, or has this just been a Milwaukee thing? What have you seen?
Excuse me. This is not just a Milwaukee County thing. We've had arrests here in our jail in Dodge County. I can't really speak on behalf of others around the state. I haven't had that conversation. But immigration has worked with my court security staff in the past when they know somebody is here appearing that they're not supposed to be in our country. And they have the full assistance of the Dodge County Sheriff's Office, and they've made a number of arrests here. and it really goes back to accountability. And these individuals broke the law when they came into our country. And our immigration folks are working their best to make sure that they can hold these individuals accountable. And that's exactly what they're doing. And a courthouse is a safe setting to do that. They're not out on the street. They're not out on a traffic stop. They're in a controlled environment with backup already there, and in an area where typically we can make these arrests without incident. And here in Dodge County, walk them right next door and book them into the jail. So I think there's a misnomer that it potentially could be more dangerous. I don't see that at all. It's much more controlled, and yes, I am seeing it in other locations. Now you hear things about going into schools and things like that. I haven't seen any of that. But a courthouse is a court of law, and if our law enforcement folks can't go into a court of law to enforce the law, that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me.
Let me ask you just the follow-up to that, and I think we discussed it yesterday, but likely a new audience here in the afternoon as well. But some of the counter-argument from folks on the other side would be, well, the courthouses, in some sense, have to respect and appreciate the criminal justice system, where if people have that fear that they could be arrested for an immigration-related offense at the courthouse, maybe they don't come forward as a witness in a crime. Maybe they don't come forward as a victim in a crime necessarily. Now, in this case, it's separate. Eduardo Flores Ruiz was the defendant and ultimately pled to the charges that he faced in that case. But do you see that side of the argument, that there could be an impact on the larger criminal justice system if there is a fear of people coming to courthouses either as victims or to testify as witnesses?
There's a lot of what ifs there. And I don't necessarily think that I'm not going to play the what if game. I see we have a lot of people who do cooperate with us, who are here illegally, and they do give statements. In fact, I get requests all the time to authorize what's called a U visa to allow people to stay in the country because they've been a victim of a crime. I'm here to tell you in Dodge County, just because you're a victim of a crime doesn't mean I'm going to approve that. But that just shows me they know what my stance is on accountability. They've come to our courthouse. They've been witnesses, and they still continue to participate in the criminal justice system. You might have an off case here and there, but I don't see that as being a major issue in our country. You're coming to a courthouse. You have to expect that you're going to be held accountable. And as Secretary Noem has indicated, it'd be best to turn yourself in rather than let us catch you at home and elsewhere. And what better way to turn yourself in than come to the courthouse and take that process, get that process moving.
Sheriff, I think it was interesting you described what's happening in Dodge County in terms of the Sheriff's Department. ICE has the full support of the Sheriff's Department cooperation, and I'm not sure if that applies to the judges there as well. Obviously a different picture from what we saw in this case in Milwaukee County, where you have the courts saying we don't want to cooperate with ICE, or we don't want to be an agent of ICE, and ICE came into this in this operation saying we didn't expect really to get that sort of assistance. I'm wondering, in Dodge County, when you go to do this, are you getting the full assistance of the courthouse and the court staff, or is there anyone there who says we don't want to see this in the courthouse?
Well, I've certainly had that question come up from the judges. Not that they necessarily disagree, but they are looking at both sides, as they should. And they've asked that those type of operations not happen in the courtroom itself. But a courthouse is a public building, open to the public. And an immigration officer coming into the courthouse to do operations is no different than going into any other public building. And so when I explained that to the judges here in Dodge County, they understood it. We simply have an arrangement in place where I've communicated with ICE and said, well, yes, you have the ability to go into a courtroom right now to do that. Let's keep it outside the courtroom. Let's keep it in the common areas of the courthouse, so that the judges don't have to get into a position where they restrict who can come in and out of their courtroom. And so there's certainly questions being asked, which I ask questions just as the judges should. We need to have a full understanding of it. I wouldn't say that they're not participant. I wouldn't say that they're participating members. They're still trying to keep the scales of justice in mind and do their job as impartially as possible. They leave that to me as the sheriff, and I'm responsible for the security of the courthouse. And so it's worked very, very well. And we just keep it out of the courtrooms.
It's interesting perspective, certainly in good comparison to what's happening in Dodge County versus what is or is not happening in Milwaukee County that has led us to this day. Sheriff Dale Schmidt, thank you again for all of the time here on the Wisconsin Live Desk.
My pleasure, and have a Merry Christmas, everybody.
Same to you. We'll take a couple minutes, be right back with our continuing coverage, Judge on Trial, here on the Live Desk. Welcome back to the Wisconsin Live Desk on this Tuesday afternoon, getting you up to speed on what's happening day 2 of the trial of Judge Hannah Dugan. They're at the very end of a lunch break, supposed to be coming back in a few moments. We thought we'd take this for a quick second to get you up to speed, our viewers. The hardest thing, I think, about this trial, but might be the most important when it comes to the actual verdict we're expecting later this week or early next week, would be the logistics of this courtroom in the 6th floor at the Milwaukee County Courthouse.
Well, the whole case revolves around what happens in this 3-minute span, right? And who goes where and why. And so I've been trying, in reading through the criminal complaint or the indictment and reading through all these, trying to make sense in my own head of what does this look like. Yeah. And if you weren't with us yesterday, this is going to be new for you. If you were, it's another kind of another chance to look at. I could watch this over and over because I think it really helps explain what are we talking about that happened here.
And think about it from the juror's perspective. They're not familiar either. So both sides have to explain what actually physically happened that day.
And I don't know if they have the benefit of this sort of a walkthrough, but this actually came, first of all, I want to remind and thank the Milwaukee County Historical Society, who got us blueprints of the 6th floor of the Milwaukee County Courthouse, from which we were able to make this sort of office layout, or this 6th floor layout. And what you see here is Judge Hannah Dugan's courtroom, courtroom 615, right off the main hallway of the 6th floor, and right next to the Chief Judge's office. I mean, just outside her door was the double doors that go down a hallway to where the Chief Judge is located. Setting the scene, this is Eduardo Flores Ruiz and his attorney, who have arrived at the courthouse. You see them, or have arrived in the courtroom.
The blue icons.
They're the blue icons here, and then Judge Hannah Dugan right there. She has come back to the courtroom now after hearing that ICE agents were out there. She's actually directed them to the Chief Judge's office. Now, if they were to leave the courtroom like a normal, defendant and attorney would leave, they would go right back through the double sets of double doors out into the public courtroom. But according to the government, in this case, Judge Hannah Dugan instead directs them to go out a jury door at the back of the room. That is where the jury comes in and out during trials. It leads back to the judge's chambers and to other offices that are not accessible to the public. They then travel down this non-public restricted hallway, and they come here to where there is a door to the left. It goes to a public staircase straight down to the 5th floor. This is key in the case because the government is arguing that Hannah Dugan intended for them to take this staircase to escape ICE agents who were still in the public hallway on the 6th floor. But the attorney for Eduardo Flores Ruiz, and her name keeps escaping me, so
I'll get it here for you while you keep going through there. Mercedes De La Rosa.
Mercedes De La Rosa
public
has
defender,
only been a public defender like a month at the time. And so she may not have been familiar with this layout in the courthouse. They don't take that door. Instead, and you see the arrow pointing down toward the 5th floor, instead they go right out into the public hallway out this door. Over in the Chief Judge's office, there are 4 of the agents still huddled there. There's a 5th one just outside the door and a 6th one here, who then sees them come out into the hallway and follows them down the hallway to the elevator, ultimately arresting Eduardo Flores Ruiz. You'll see it as they exit, they pass right by that undercover agent who follows them down the hallway and eventually takes the elevator with them, and then the arrest is made. So that tells you, essentially visualizes what is at issue.
So much of the testimony today has come from those different agents involved in the operation, and much of them saying that basically their operation got blown up when Judge Dugan called so many of them into the chief judge's offices. It was that one agent who had actually come back outside at the time, who was the only one who follows Eduardo Flores Ruiz and his attorney onto the elevator, and eventually they end up arresting him outside of the county courthouse. But it's that logistics, that exit, that seems to be pivotal.
And a key point for the prosecution here is in saying that she got them into the chief judge's office and then she sped up the case. She rushed the case, in their view, to try to get it through so that he could get out before they left the chief judge's office. They're framing this as a stall tactic to get him out of the building. The defense says there's no evidence of that. So.
Another quick break here, and then we're going to be joined by our legal analyst, Julius Kim, perfect person to break down what we've heard so far, some of the holes the defense is trying to poke in that testimony on day 2 of the trial of Judge Hannah Dugan. Welcome back to the Wisconsin Live Desk. It is 1 a.m. We are rolling right along here on day 2 of the trial of Judge. Hey, how about that? I'm a morning anchor, all right? Sometimes I fall into the old habits.
If it's 1 a.m. and we are still here,
we've been going for a while. No, not exactly. 1
long.
p.m. 1 p.m. There we go. I stand corrected. Here on day 2 of the trial of Judge Hannah Dugan, we are just seeing all the relative parties coming back from a lunch break. They went on break at about 12:05 this morning. But to get you up to speed, today has continued what the government started yesterday after opening statements from both sides, calling a series of agents and officers who were involved in the operation, an attempted and eventual arrest of Eduardo Flores Ruiz on the morning of April 18th of 2025, earlier this spring. So yesterday, we had a few different officers involved in that. It actually led into today. They finished up cross-examination of one of those FBI special agents. And then today already, we've had another FBI special agent by the name of Phil Jackling. We've had a DHS, Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Patrol officer, Joseph Cera. These are some of the images we're getting from inside of the courtroom. So you just saw the image from the sketch artist of Judge Hannah Dugan. This is Cera, the CBP, Customs and Border Protection officer. And then the last person who was on the witness stand before we broke for lunch here was an ICE deportation officer, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, by the name of Joseph Vasconcelos. And a number of these different agents are important, but Vasconcelos especially was the person who actually wrote up the warrant for Eduardo Flores Ruiz, putting this operation into action, and was the lead for this operation on that day. So it's been interesting testimony from all of them. We're also getting the cross-examination of those different officers, and we have a wonderful person to break it all down with us right now. That would be Julius Kim, alongside myself and Brian Polson from Kim and Lavoie, a defense attorney, but also long history as a prosecutor as well. So Julius, you're an interesting person to hear from both sides. First of all, I know you've been following along with us on day 2 of this trial. What stood out to you as the government kind of works its way through this case?
Well, I think that what stood out to me is just basically how mundane these trials can be. And guess, in all honesty, this is not one of these fast-moving trials where there's, DNA evidence or some type of smoking gun or anything with real shock value. This is the case that the government has to break down and go through methodically. I mean, the very first witness that the government called was more of a foundational witness who was really laying out the diagrams of the hallways of the courthouse and the courtrooms, et cetera. It's real kind of dry, boring stuff, but it's stuff that needs to happen. It's the boring stuff that needs to happen when you're presenting a case. Because what the state is, what the government, the federal government is actually trying to do at this point is just show the evolution of how we got to this point in time. And right now they're going through step by step how these agents got into position, got there that morning, went through the security checkpoints. I think that the government is also trying to establish the fact that they were doing things by the book. They weren't there to necessarily cause problems or cause chaos, but we're seeing the evolution of how eventually things got a little chaotic.
To your point about this occasionally perhaps feeling mundane, in fact, the judge overseeing this case, Judge Lynn Edelman, at one point interjected questioning to say it seemed to be getting repetitive, considering we'd heard testimony from previous agents already on that, and the government attorneys pointing back that in this case, the final person we heard from was the lead of the operation, so we kind of have to get his perspective as well. But you weren't the only one to note that, Julius.
Well, I assume that Judge Edelman, he's made a point that he wants this thing to move along. He doesn't want to see this thing drag out. So if you can find places for efficiencies, let's not be redundant.
Yeah.
If this is unnecessary testimony, let's move on. Is that, I imagine you've run into that situation as well. You want to sometimes hear from different perspectives and different people who saw it, but if they're telling you the same thing, maybe we can move on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate Judge Edelman making that comment, kind of keeping things moving along, because as lawyers, we like to talk a lot, and sometimes we don't realize how much talking we're doing, and sometimes we're in the guise of trying to be thorough. We may be asking a lot of repetitive questions, so I appreciate that Judge Edelman reminded the government that, hey, we've kind of been through this already. You're going to lose your audience. Let's keep things moving along.
As the government lays out its case, I think the last day, basically, once witness testimony started, has been interesting, I'm sure from your perspective as a defense attorney, to see how Hannah Dugan's legal team starts to chip away at those different witnesses, at the credibility, the authority of these members of different law enforcement groups. So what have you noted from the way that Jason Luzak and other attorneys for Judge Dugan have begun their cross-examination of these different witnesses?
Yeah, they haven't really gotten into the meat and potatoes of what happened in the courtroom yet. And I think those witnesses are going to be actually more compelling, in all honesty, more interesting. These are still kind of foundational witnesses that we're dealing with. But I think what they're doing is they're kind of setting up a two-pronged defense. One prong is just basically setting up the fact that she, meaning Judge Dugan, was not intending to actually obstruct these officers, was not intending to hide Mr. Flores Ruiz. That's one prong, that's one angle that I think the defense is starting to set up through their questioning. But I also think that's starting to set up this second prong, which is the fact that these agents weren't actually obstructed. And by virtue of the fact that they had an opportunity to take down or to arrest Mr. Flores-Ruiz right there in the hallway of the 6th floor of the courthouse, yet they chose not to do that. And so that begs the question, did Judge Dugan's actions that day actually obstruct these agents in doing what they came there to do?
Well, I do wonder about this too, because the government has made a point of saying, whether or not something ultimately happened doesn't mean you didn't try, doesn't mean that you didn't try and fail. And I do wonder, in a case like this, will Hannah Dugan? I mean, the defense doesn't have the burden, but yet there does seem to be this lingering question. Okay, if you weren't trying to obstruct, then why'd you send him out the back door? Will they have to answer that question? Because unless Hannah Dugan takes the stand, you can't really ask her that question.
Yeah, this is one of these cases where I think it's going to be hard for Judge Dugan to present a strong defense in the case without her getting on the stand and testifying. The hardest part to overcome in this entire case from a defense perspective, in my opinion, with the limited knowledge I have of the facts, they have all of the discovery and the reports and all that, is why did Judge Dugan direct or tell Mr. Flores-Ruiz and his attorney to go out that side door? Why not just have him go through the front door? And that seemed to be the most damning fact. And there could be a legitimate reason as to why she did that, but it needs some explanation. And I think that the only person that can really thoroughly and explain why she did that and to the satisfaction of a jury is Judge Dugan. And so I think that at some point in time, my gut feeling is that Judge Dugan is going to have to take the stand to explain why she did what she did.
Interesting. The other thing that has come up this morning as well, not just related to that hallway, but also the schedule change, I guess you could say, that it seemed like when those agents were moved to Chief Judge Carl Ashley's offices, that Judge Dugan rushed basically the proceeding for Eduardo Flores-Ruiz so far. Is that common that things would get jumped around like that on the morning of what was expected to be a very busy day in her courtroom? Or is that something that the government is rightly so kind of pointing out, that things seem to get worked around in those moments?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, in all honesty. I think that the government is fairly and rightly kind of suggesting that Judge Dugan may have kind of done a bait and switch, kind of sent these agents to the Chief Judge's office and then quickly went back to her courtroom and tried to get Mr. Flores-Ruiz's case called so that she can get him out of there. That's the image they're trying to paint because it fits with the narrative that they're trying to create for the jury.
And one of the key
practitioners that
go ahead.
Yeah, for any practitioners that practice routinely in the Milwaukee County Courthouse, though, it is not unusual for cases to be called out of turn. You call cases as people are ready. You call cases depending on who's available, which attorneys are there, how long people have been waiting. So there could be a very innocent explanation as to why Judge Dugan decided to take Mr. Flores-Ruiz's case when she did. It's not necessarily that she moved him ahead of line. It was just that if the case is ready to go, these judges, with the amount of cases that they have to listen to every morning and every afternoon, are going to try and get these cases done as soon as possible.
I do know that one of the witnesses that the state plans to call, or the government plans to call rather, is Walter Pyle, who's a private practice attorney who had been told his case and his client were being called next. So he was sitting at the defense table waiting, and that's when all of this went down and Judge Dugan left the courtroom and then comes back. And when she comes back, he's expected to testify, as it shows in the documents, that she then said, no, get out of here. We're bringing this case up instead. It was the change of plan, not just that you called someone out of order, but the idea that we'd said, you're next. Nope, not you anymore. We're doing this other one. That is going to be, I think, a key.
Well, how about the victims, too? The victims of Eduardo Flores-Ruiz, who were there expecting their trial date and learned basically an hour later that it had already happened at that point, too.
I think that's what the government plans to. Yeah. I mean, those seem to be points that obviously would be important to the government making that case, right? That this was moved ahead intentionally.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are great points to make. And again, it leaves you wondering why. Why is she doing this? Was there some more innocent explanation as to why they took Mr. Flores-Ruiz's case ahead of the other defendant's case after that attorney was told that he was going to be next? And again, it's all kind of pointing to this feeling that I have that although it's not usual, it doesn't happen all the time in criminal cases, that Judge Dugan is going to have to take the stand to explain these things away.
Go ahead,
Jules, I just wonder, though, as a defense attorney, or someone with experience in that, the government doesn't just have to prove that she did something unusual. They have to prove that she did something that was that obstructed, that concealed. Is there a leap between the two? Or is that unusual behavior enough? Is it just evidence in support of the government's claim that that's what she did?
Yeah, for obstructing an officer or obstructing a government agent, really all they got to prove is that someone made the government's agent's job more difficult to do. That's kind of in a nutshell. There's specific jury instructions that Judge Edelman will read to the jurors, but really that's what it amounts to. As to why that may have happened, that's really not part of the analysis. The question, well, it is actually for the felony level charge, and that's an interesting part because the government has charged Judge Dugan with intentionally obstructing these agents in their duties, and so they're going to have to get into her intent. It's not just a matter of did her actions obstruct these agents. It's more why she did those, and if she did this with the purpose to obstruct the agents, that creates the more serious charge.
That's a really good point, Julius, too, and something we've gotten in a series of questions from viewers as well, which, by the way, good time to mention.
Yeah.
If you're watching along with us, please send us your questions. If it's for us, if it's for Julius, there's a QR code that you can find online to send questions. But, for example, James in Heartland sent us this, Julius. How many years in prison could she see if found guilty? And to that end, the two different counts that she's charged with, concealing an individual to prevent arrest is the misdemeanor, but obstruction, which you were just discussing there, is the felony. So that's the far more serious one when it comes to possible jail time and fines that could add up to hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially, right?
Yeah, the total amount that I think she's looking at in terms of total exposure is 6 years in federal prison, and I think up to $350,000 in fines. Now, you have to remember that these charges, or those statements involve like the worst of the worst scenario, like the worst possible sentence someone can get. But Judge Dugan isn't in that category. She's a first-time offender, so to speak. She has no prior criminal record. This wasn't a crime of violence. There are a lot of other factors that a court has to consider in determining what a fair sentence would be in a case. And in this particular case, I don't think that she's, looking at prison time. In all honesty, I'm not sure she's looking at even jail time for what occurred here. I think that she might be looking at probation, maybe a little bit of a fine. But this case is not so much about the punishment or sentence that Judge Dugan would be facing as much as the convictions themselves.
Yeah, and certainly some of the headlines that, let's just say, both sides of the immigration debate would take from the results of this trial as well. Julius, if you don't mind, can you stick around a couple minutes? We got to take a short break here, and then a few other things I want to ask you about what's come out in testimony this morning, including the dynamics of the staff in a courtroom, because that seems like it's already coming into play here. And then one of the names that we're expecting to hear on the witness stand, but has already come up already, that would be the Chief Judge himself, Carl Ashley, and his role in the atmosphere at the courthouse on that day last spring. So a quick break, and then we'll get to that and much more with Julius Kim coming up. But as I mentioned, that QR code, if you want to send us a question, there it is. Scan that or go to fox6now.com to submit your questions. We'll try to hit as many of those as we can throughout our coverage here of Judge Hannah Dugan's trial. We're here on Fox 6 and Fox Local from noon to 4 each and every day. We're back here on the Wisconsin Live Desk. Judge on trial, day 2 of the trial of Judge Hannah Dugan here in Milwaukee. She operates in the Milwaukee County Courthouse. This trial is a federal case, so taking place at the U.S. Courthouse in downtown Milwaukee, right off there of Wisconsin Avenue. We have Julius Kim still here with us. And Julius, I kind of teased this before we went to break, but I'm curious about your perspective from this as a practicing attorney, too, because already what we're starting to hear are some of the, let's just say, differences in dynamic, in work between the different people who report to that courthouse each and every day. And we're expecting to hear testimony from a number of these people, even today, as we're getting so many of these law enforcement officials who were there, FBI special agents, ICE officers, and more, discussing what they heard from people like Bailiff, who made a comment apparently to one of them that he, quote, didn't dime you out, as in did not tell Judge Dugan that they were there for an arrest, that court clerk is also going to be pretty pivotal to this. What is the dynamic, the relationship between a judge and another judge, as we're seeing with Judge Cera involved in this as well, the judge and the people who work in her courtroom on the day-to-day that then could all come out in testimony over the next few days here with the trial?
Yeah, that's a really good observation, because I was thinking the same thing. People that don't know, who haven't been in the courthouse every day, don't realize just how tight a judge and his or her staff really are. I mean, between the court reporter, a clerk, bailiffs, etc., these people are with each other, 8 to 10 hours every day, and they get very, very close. But I can't help wondering, after all this is said and done, what that first day back in court would feel like, because there's kind of a lot of awkwardness going on here. You have bailiffs that are testifying about one thing, clerks testifying that will testify about another thing, court reporters, and not all of them are necessarily flattering to Judge Dugan or may support Judge Dugan's defense. And I just think that does create kind of a really awkward dynamic for that first day back to work, assuming Judge Dugan makes it back in the bench at some point in time.
I do wonder, Julius, if it's not, one of those situations where, hey, we're all tight with our coworkers until one of the coworkers gets in trouble, and now I'm being questioned. You go, whoa, it wasn't me. I do think maybe there's a little bit of a different thing when federal agents start investigating.
It's that season when holiday parties are happening, too.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who's getting the invites to those different holiday parties over there at the Milwaukee County Courthouse.
It's really cringy, but you're absolutely right. It's like if they're being questioned by the chief judge's office or someone else, maybe there's some shading going on, just human nature. You're trying to protect your coworker, but once you got federal agents in your face, people from agencies like the FBI or U.S. Attorney's Office, I think that things may take a little bit different turn. I do think everyone is just trying to, that's a cynical side to me, but I think that everyone is just basically saying what they observe themselves to the best that they can. Some people are going to recall things a little bit differently. That's just human nature, but it does make for an interesting dynamic back to work someday.
I feel like there is some messiness in all this, because there are also, clearly, everyone has individual feelings about the general issue of illegal immigration, about immigration policy. And we saw that in one of the videos of one of the public defenders, I think Robert Mueller's his name. You see as the ICE agents, right after Judge Dugan ushers them all to the chief judge's office, the fourth and fifth ones go walking in. You see him come around the corner. He's about to meet with a client. He looks over and he sees that they went in there, and he pumps his fist in celebration. You could see there was some rooting interest going on, and I think that's true for everyone in that courthouse has an opinion. They have a job to do, but they have an opinion, and that's sort of always under all of this, isn't it?
It sure is. And, these are all complicated issues, in all honesty. We can see that playing out just in real time every day when you turn on the news. And, that was part of the problem here. That was part of the issue going on at the time. And I know that we were going to talk about Chief Judge Carl Ashley in a second, but I mean, he had and has a very difficult job also in trying to navigate all of these different personalities, all of these different perspectives, all of these different opinions as to what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing. And it's still something that isn't quite clear. Everyone's just kind of feeling their way through it right now.
Let me ask you about Chief Judge Carl Ashley, since that's a perfect segue there. And he's come up a lot already in some of the testimony we've heard, certainly in the opening statements yesterday. And it's a good reminder of just how much was in flux at this point of early 2025. Trump administration re-enters office in January, immediately starts this change to the way that some arrests are happening at courthouses around the country, let alone here in Milwaukee County. There had been 2 previous arrests at the courthouse already. And it seems at least from the defense's standpoint, some of what they're trying to point out with these agents and with what happened in terms of Judge Dugan's actions specifically that day and the possible intent here is kind of the vacuum of direction coming from that chief judge's office. What have you noticed with that? And what is the responsibility of a chief judge in terms of dictating what happens in his hallways?
Yeah, the chief judge does have a responsibility, in my opinion, of making sure that the other judges within his district and within his purview have clear guidance as to how things are going to occur within the courthouse. I mean, he's the chief administrative officer, essentially, for the courthouse and tells all the other judges or gives all the other judges guidance on how they're going to be doing things. Now, in Carl Ashley's defense, in all honesty, things moved pretty quickly. I mean, we could debate whether this administration's policies and tactics are good or not. But one thing that I think that we can't really debate is just how fast all of this is being implemented. It just seems like as soon as the president came into office, then suddenly these arrests were being made, and no one really had time to prepare and react to these things because these were unprecedented. Again, his administration might have the right to do all these things, and that's really not the question. The question is, was there a better time to roll all of this out so that all the different parties in the systems could get together and figure out the best way to do this to avoid things like this happening?
To that point, Julius, we just want to draw our viewers' attention to what they're seeing on screen right now, because this is a piece of evidence that the defense has brought up in cross-examination of one of the agents, FBI Special Agent Jeffrey Baker, this morning, brought up an email sent by Chief Judge Carl Ashley to courthouse colleagues making note that two people had been put in custody in the courthouse already at that point. This email is from April 4th, so about 2 weeks before the arrest of Eduardo Flores Ruiz. And even in the middle part of that, it says, if these detentions occurred in the courtroom, I believe it would have directly interfered with our judicial process. I'm not sure if we have the authority to intervene in what happens in a public hallway. So that's a couple weeks before, and he says he's reached out to the Corporation Counsel, the Director's Office, for their input, but to please let me know if you're aware of other ICE activity in the courthouse complex. So
I want to add to that, too, because just before that, and this is when you talk about the vacuum of direction, just before that, there was actually an email from another judge, Laura Gramling Perez, who sent an email to other judges saying ICE is taking people into custody in the public hallways in the courthouse complex, and then forwards them a presentation from the National Judicial Network that talks about some best practices. And she adds in this email, and Hannah Dugan received this email, and I believe responded to it and thanked her for it. Two quick takeaways. One, ICE can legally conduct enforcement, i.e. take people into custody in public areas of the courthouse. So we're seeing that you have another judge who's going, hey, everybody, this is going on, and here's some guidance on what to do. It's coming from another judge, not from the chief judge. Is that part of the concern here?
Yeah, I think Judge Gramling Perez was just trying to present some more facts to the judges collectively in the context of what you just read, because everyone is trying to figure it out. And everyone wants to try and get it right. Remember, judges aren't advocates. It's not so easy for them to just take a side and then act accordingly based upon what side that they're on. They have to be neutral. And so it's important that they get it right, looking after the interests of everyone involved, not only the government, not only the federal government, the citizens of Milwaukee County, defendants, victims, everyone. And so they're trying to get it right. And I think that what they're trying to do is they're trying to figure it out, number one, trying to understand how all these immigration laws and arrest warrants work. But then number two, to come up with a policy that meets all of these competing interests, and so that they can that is fair and that can be administered fairly and uniformly across the courthouse.
Let me ask you this from an attorney's perspective as well. I was just thinking about it because we kind of started this with a great comment from you that you can see how mundane these trials can be at certain points as we're laying out so many of the details here in the early goings. How does that play into swaying a jury? What is your concern that you, on the one hand, have to explain a lot of this legalese, a lot of the operations of a courthouse that are not familiar to people, while also not losing them and not, I guess, having them kind of go away over the course of this trial if you can't hone in on what actually was the key issue?
Yeah, I personally try and prepare juries for that by just letting them know up front what they're going to be seeing and when they're going to be seeing it, so that they understand this might be the slow part of the trial that I was referring to. I mean, I can't say that directly to the jurors, but if I kind of present that and let's say the opening statements. Then they know what's happening, what the lawyers are up to, that they're going to have to lay this foundational evidence first and build upon that. So that's why those opening statements are so important, so the jurors can follow along and understand, okay, well, this is part of the setup for what is coming down the road because the attorneys showed their cards during opening statement.
Do you have any sense of who the state might be holding on to as their sort of, if there is such a thing here, as their smoking gun, their key witness, their hammer at the end here?
Gosh, there's some witness out there, in my opinion, that we all don't know about, because the big thing for the government is, in my opinion, the big pivot point for the government is establishing that Judge Dugan told Mr. Flores Ruiz and his lawyer to go down that hidden stairway. You have this wonderful diagram and animation that shows this hallway. Now, I've been down that hallway before. I was assigned to this particular courtroom when I was an assistant district attorney, so I'm very familiar with the layout of everything that has happened here. But if the government has a witness that can say that Judge Dugan specifically told Mr. Flores Ruiz and his attorney to go down the hidden stairway, that is going to be really problematic. Now, the fact that they ultimately didn't go down that stairway, it kind of cuts both ways. But it could just be a matter of either they didn't hear Judge Dugan say that, or understood Judge Dugan to say that, or just panicked and just went through the wrong door. But if they have a witness that makes it clear that Judge Dugan gave them those specific instructions, that's going to be really damaging for the defense.
Can I ask one quick thing, Julius, because it's a witness that we will not hear from. We know this because he has been deported, and that's Eduardo Flores Ruiz. I was curious at the time when all that was happening, why the government wouldn't want to keep him here in the country as a possible witness, seeing as how he is the key player outside of Judge Hannah Dugan in all of this. I understand there's a language barrier, and maybe the assumption is you can get the same testimony from his public defender. That would be Mercedes de la Rosa, but was that at all a surprise to you that Eduardo Flores Ruiz himself is not involved in this trial?
No, from two perspectives. One is that I think that if he tries to testify or tries to cooperate in some manner, then he risks putting himself in jeopardy, potential legal liability, potentially more charges for obstructing himself, because he's the one that ran out of the courtroom, right? But number two, remember, the government's the one that just deported him, okay? I'm sure that he does not have a particular interest in helping the government prosecute this case against a judge who, if you're looking at it from the government's perspective, was trying to help him. So I think that has a lot to do with why he's not on the government's witness list. A, I don't think any attorney worth their salt is going to let him testify or at least even talk to agents about what happened without some type of immunity deal. But B, he probably is not motivated to do that.
Well said. All right. Julius Kim, we know this. You're invited to our holiday party. You've been very kind with us. No cringy necessities or interactions here on this. Appreciate you being on with us again. We're going to take another quick break here on the Wisconsin Live Desk. Much more on day 2 of the trial. Testimony has resumed at the federal courthouse downtown, and we're getting it all for you here on the Live Desk. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Wisconsin Live Desk here, 131. Fox 6 investigator Brian Polson. I'm anchor Carl Deffenbaugh here, handling our coverage of the trial of Judge Hannah Dugan. We're here for you every day, noon to 4 p.m., as we can get you inside the federal courthouse, which, on the other side, does not have any video or audio recording coming out. So our team of reporters is inside right now, detailing to us what is happening here on day 2. A number of the different members of law enforcement who were there on the morning of April 18th to arrest Eduardo Flores Ruiz have taken the stand yesterday into today, and now potentially might be one of the more interesting witnesses we're expecting during this trial.
Yeah, you see right there on the bottom of your screen who's on the stand now. It is the circuit court judge Judge Cera, who was in the courtroom next to Hannah Dugan.
She is in the surveillance video that we've seen so much of during our coverage. The other woman next to Judge Hannah Dugan in the hallway in a black robe, discussing things with those law enforcement agents and officers. But from the government's filings, it seems that she was not necessarily comfortable with Judge Dugan's approach. So what's going to come out in the next few moments here, and we'll try to bring that to you, could be potentially very interesting for the government's case here. One quick thing, Brian, that you wanted to mention before from that discussion of some of the other judges involved in this debate at the county courthouse.
I just want to make mention, when we were going through jury selection in this process, all the jurors were asked, do you know any of the witnesses? They read off like 26 names. Do you know any of these people? I think one came forward. They were neighbors. In fact, it was someone who happened to be a neighbor with the very same person I'm about to mention. So I thought I should disclose that Judge Laura Gramling Perez is someone I do know, but I generally know her more through her husband, who I played soccer with for 20 years out at Eline Soccer Park. Beyond that, just full disclosure, wanted that out there because we mentioned her, and she is a witness who will testify in this trial.
How good a soccer player is her husband?
You know what? This is a great thing. Her husband is, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, he's 59 years old, he's almost 60 years old, and the man can still play soccer.
I like
It's impressive. But I want to go back to the testimony now, because as I'm watching, this is a really key moment right here. We have Judge Cera is being asked, and we talked about that hallway. And one of the things the defense is going to try to say is it's not totally unusual for someone to go down that hallway for a judge to send a defense. Well, Judge Cera, who shares that hallway, their courtrooms are on opposite sides of this restricted hallway, was asked, have you ever allowed a criminal defendant to leave your courtroom through that restricted hallway? She answered one word, no. So that obviously would stand in contrast to the case that the defense is trying to make on behalf of Judge Dugan, that sometimes it is normal for people to go out that way.
We had heard in some of the reporting leading up to the trial that hallway in question is occasionally used when a criminal defendant is in handcuffs, but in this case, Eduardo Flores Ruiz left not in handcuffs. He was still free to go. So that question of what happens in that hallway, honestly, great person to bring in right now. Jason Calvi, that would be our political reporter who's been all over this, from the Milwaukee County Courthouse. So the trial's playing out on Wisconsin Avenue at the federal courthouse. The events actually happened about 1.5 miles west of there at the county courthouse, the big building you see along the interstate there in downtown. So Jason, let's bring you in there again, because that seems to be a very key point here from Judge Cera. Again, can't repeat it enough, the prosecuting attorney. Have you ever allowed a criminal defendant to leave your courtroom through that restricted hallway? No, is the answer from Judge Cera. What do you think?
Yeah, so I want to give you a lay of the land when we're hearing from that Circuit Court Judge Cera testifying right now in the federal court. This is her courtroom. It's down this hallway here. And so that's the lay of the land for her courtroom. She's the one testifying right now in federal court in the trial of Judge Dugan. Now, how close is her courtroom to Judge Dugan's courtroom? Well, Judge Dugan's is the next courtroom down this hallway here on the right-hand side. And then the Chief Judge's office, Carl Ashley, is the room past that. Down a short hallway, then to another set of doors, and then a reception area down there. So these are the three big courtrooms that we're talking about, or offices as well, that we're talking about here at the Milwaukee County Courthouse, as now Judge Cera is the one called to testify in federal court. She was asked if she ever brought, as you mentioned, a criminal defendant. Have you ever allowed a criminal defendant to leave your courtroom through the restricted hallway? Her answer in federal court today, no.
Jason, I know we asked you to take a lot of steps yesterday because you had to go down the stairs to the 5th floor, and I don't know if you can take these steps, but when you point down that hallway to where Judge Cera's courtroom is, and then you show down the hallway, it looks like they're actually maybe farther apart than they really are, because if I understand, you can tell me, if you go down that hallway, you have to turn left, and then the courtroom is behind that door to the left, so it's actually much closer in proximity behind the scenes, essentially, than it looks maybe out there in the hallway. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's a hallway here to Judge Cervera's courtroom, and as we mentioned, Judge Dugan's courtroom is down there. And then there's all this space here. There's bathrooms, there's stairwells, but then behind all of these walls are other parts of the courtroom that might be connected. I know, Brian, you've looked at some of the things like the renderings and the plans for this courthouse, and particularly this floor, that kind of show you what's going on. But from this vantage point, again, they're the two closest. They're very close. Let's just say they're close courtrooms here in the Milwaukee County Courthouse.
Some of the other details we're getting, again, this is just Circuit Court Judge Cristela Cervera on the witness stand here. Hey, but how about this for us in the world of journalism? She has her bachelor's in journalism, 1998 from UW-Madison.
What do you know?
There you go. And takes a career pivot, of course, after that with her law degree from Madison as well. First became a Circuit Court judge in 2021 and elected again in April of 2022. So that's a little bit of the background on the person who is on the witness stand right now at the federal courthouse. As you can tell, all of us looking at our computers just to get our viewers up to speed here, what we do in this case, and you're seeing those images from the hallway. Judge Crivella, who's on the witness stand, is the woman with the dark hair in the middle of your screen, in between one of those agents, with Judge Dugan talking to another agent seated on the bench right there. So the bottom right of your screen is Judge Crivella there, seen
Cervera.
Cervera. I was my apologies. Lots of names here involved. Cervera.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we got you, Jason. Apologies. So that's
The photojournalist Mike Basuic was asking, how are we pronouncing this name? Because everybody seems to be pronouncing it differently. That is the judge that we're talking about right there. Okay,
there is a judge who
right now is testifying.
Just to be clear, there is a Judge Cervera. That's someone different.
Judge Cervera is the one that's testifying right now, and according to our notes inside of the federal courthouse, she's been talking about what happened that particular day. We're talking about April 18th, and at one point in time, court staff was warned that there was going to actually, on April 18th, be a hailstorm, and so she told the court today that she was going, I believe, to potentially move her car.
I want to.
Yeah, they may want to move their cars as hail's forecasted. Cervera says she left and moved her car from the surface lot, and she went to move her car because the hail was forecasted, and then ran into Judge Dugan and came back to the 6th floor where we are, where both of their courtrooms are. Her courtroom's down this way. Judge Dugan's courtroom is behind the camera and just down the hallway a little bit of ways down that way.
I don't know if you guys are able to bring up my laptop again, because I want to show I have the blueprints from the Milwaukee County Historical Society to show you what I was talking about just a moment ago, where the proximity to the two. I don't know if you can see it clearly enough, but over here is Judge Dugan's courtroom.
Which part of the screen, in case people can't see your
I don't know
cursor?
if maybe you can't see my mouse. Okay,
Yeah.
So it is kind of the right middle part of the screen is her courtroom. They were numbered differently back then when these blueprints were taken, so they don't match. But there's a courtroom. There's another courtroom right next to it, a big square that you see kind of to the left center portion of your screen. There's a hallway over to the left of it that you go down and access her courtroom through there. But behind them, they are connected in the private offices. So behind the scenes, those two courtrooms are connected through offices and that's where Judge Dugan apparently went, through those back rooms to go get Judge Cervera off of the bench.
Yeah.
And then they came out that hallway, the same one that we saw Eduardo Flores Ruiz come out with his attorney later on. That's why she was able to go get her, because they are in directly neighboring courtrooms.
Here we go with some more of the testimony that we are getting from our reporter Bill Miston, who is listening to the proceedings at the federal courthouse right now with Judge Cervera on the witness stand. So when she comes back to her courtroom that morning of April 18th, she does not believe she was able to actually start calling any cases before Judge Hannah Dugan came in through the jury door, which you just alluded to there, Brian, motioned for Judge Cervera to come with her. Here's some of the testimony that we're getting from Judge Cervera on the witness stand, saying Judge Dugan used her pointer finger, moved the finger as to have Cervera come with her.
Sort of one of these?
Yeah, sounds like it. The quote from Cervera, I thought something bad had happened, and it was embarrassing to be summoned in that way. Interesting to get some of their relationship there in that context as well. Quote, I had to go into my chambers to meet her. She came into my chambers. I started to unzip my robe, and she said, leave your robe on. We know that has already been brought up a number of times by the government, the fact that both those judges were in their official robes when they went out into that public hallway, not necessarily a normal thing to address the ICE agents. Cervera continues in this testimony saying, ICE is here. We need to check a warrant. And Judge Dugan, according to Cera, proceeded to walk back towards the restricted hallway. I heard something about Flores. She was speaking as we were walking and talking, and it was hard to hear based on the acoustics and speed we were walking. So this is, honestly, folks, what we have been waiting for, right? This exact testimony about what had happened in that just matter of moments, minutes really, the morning of April 18th.
And before we go back to Jason, I want to point out, we're reading these words from Bill Miston, who's in the courtroom, translating what he's hearing as quickly as he can. The quotes may not be 100% accurate. He's putting in quotes if it is a quotation. Otherwise, he is paraphrasing. So what you just heard from Carl is very close to what's actually being spoken on the stand right now. But obviously, we don't have time to verify the direct quotes. We just know we're getting this translation from someone whose fingers are working as fast as he can in the courthouse. Jason, we're hearing that discussion about that hallway. Could you show our viewers again who haven't seen where that hallway is, that courtroom 615-1 door, or whatever it is, that jury door that comes out to the hallway? That's the one that the judges came out, and then also the one that ultimately Eduardo Flores Ruiz comes out.
Yeah, so I guess we'll get ready for a little field trip here. We got to move our stuff down a little bit here. So we're talking about the 6th floor of the Milwaukee County Courthouse, and we already showed you where Judge Cervera's courtroom is, down that corridor there. Judge Dugan's courtroom is the one on this side of the hallway, room 615 there. Her courtroom is right there. I'll show you where the main entrances are if you just follow me a few more steps back here. This is the main entrance for Judge Dugan's courtroom. People enter and exit through this door. Interesting enough, on the doorway here is a note dated April 14th, so just several days before this whole interaction took place with the federal agents outside in the hallway here. It says, if any attorney, witness coordinator, or other court official knows or believes that a person feels unsafe coming to the courthouse to courtroom 615, please notify the branch 31 clerk to request court appearance via Zoom. And so that was several days before this interaction with the federal agents, because we'd already seen several arrests take place in the Milwaukee County Courthouse. In March, there was one, and then one in April as well. And it led to the chief judge, whose office is right there, Carl Ashley, sending out a note to his judicial colleagues, letting them know that there was a situation involving arrests inside the Milwaukee County Courthouse by federal immigration agents. And then a few days later, he also sent out a press release alerting the public to his very serious concerns about arrests taking place inside of the courthouse. He said in that press release he was worried about chilling the judicial system. So this is the main entrance again to Judge Dugan's courtroom. But what happened on April 18th is prosecutors allege Judge Dugan took Eduardo Flores Ruiz, who is a defendant who was in her courtroom facing charges of domestic abuse for beating up his roommates, getting into a fight with his roommates. Prosecutors allege she took him to a non-public hallway, and that non-public hallway is on the other side of this door. So you can see here you need a key pass to get inside this hallway. You can see juries and court staff are able to get in through the keypad here into that non-public hallway. So we see from the surveillance video up here, you can see all the cameras inside this courthouse. The surveillance video shows Eduardo Flores Ruiz and his public defender exiting through this door, which again is a non-public doorway. There are two doors, two exits from that non-public hallway. This is the first. This is the one that Eduardo Flores Ruiz is seen using on April 18th. But if we come here, the second doorway, there's people in this hallway. I don't know if they're interviewing witnesses or whatnot, so I'm not going to go down there. But there's a second doorway from that non-public hallway that exits into this room here, and this is a public stairway that would then lead you down to the 5th floor of the building. Right now I'm standing on the 6th floor. So this is the discussion
probably good for Jason.
That's really pivotal to this case against Judge Dugan.
We didn't have to make you take the stairs again today, Jason. That's what we were trying to avoid.
You're a photographer at that point. You guys have been getting your steps in again.
I would have brought you guys in there, but there is looks like there's some sort of interview taking place over there with court staff. I don't want to interrupt that.
While this testimony
is happening,
not
Jason, to interfere with what's happening inside the courthouse here.
A short break here on the Wisconsin Live Desk, but again, good on you for showing us that hallway, because so far this seems to be one of the more important pieces of testimony to come from Judge Cristela Cervera, asked by one of the government prosecutors just moments ago, have you ever allowed a criminal defendant to leave your courtroom through that very restricted hallway that Jason just showed us? The one-word answer, no. And while that testimony continues, we're going to take a short break, get you more of what is happening on the witness stand in the trial of Judge Hannah Dugan in just a moment. Welcome back to the Wisconsin Live Desk. On this Tuesday afternoon, we are at what could end up being one of the pivotal moments of the trial of Judge Hannah Dugan. Not just anyone on the witness stand right now, but a fellow Milwaukee County judge. That would be Cristela Cervera, who is seen in so much of that surveillance video standing next to Judge Hannah Dugan on the morning of April 18th. She is on the bottom right. That is Judge Cervera right there. Judge Hannah Dugan in the background with the lighter hair, but Judge Dugan is the one who is seen most taking charge of those interactions with federal agents. Throughout our coverage here, and again, we're here with you streaming noon to 4 each and every day of the Dugan trial. We want your questions to come to us. We'll try to get you the answers. We have gotten a couple of these, including from one of our coworkers as well this morning, Brian, who was curious about this, but also a similar question to what we got from James in Heartland. Not only how many years in prison could she see if found guilty, Judge Hannah Dugan, but also would she be stripped of her duties as a judge forever? And we heard from Julius Kim earlier, and up to 6 years in prison, a $350,000 fine if convicted on both counts, a misdemeanor and a felony. The likelihood of that maximum sentence being reached, not very likely.
He actually said he didn't think she'd see any jail time at all. He believes it would be probation if convicted.
But the question of whether she'd be stripped of her duties as a judge, I believe you guys were discussing this with Mordecai Lee, our political expert we've been talking too long.
So far as he was saying yesterday that if she was convicted of the felony, that it would be an automatic stripping of her judicial duties. But that's
the misdemeanor,
that's the
maybe.
The misdemeanor, it's a little trickier because that could be up to the state Supreme Court, which certainly has the authority to suspend, as they did judges in this case, or to take away their law license, things like that. It could also be something that's left to voters.
But she is an elected official.
She's an elected official. She would not be up for re-election until 2028. So it's not clear what would happen if she's convicted of a misdemeanor, if she's not convicted at all. But the felony is the clear one. In that case, I think it would be automatic, and there would have to be someone elected to or appointed to fulfill the rest of her term.
One of the other questions we got from one of the viewers here, let me find it for you. Heather in Burlington asked us, any charges for the woman you see standing in the hallway with the judge in the black robe also? And that's a very pertinent question.
She's talking about the person on the stand right now, Judge Cristela Cervera. Here's the interesting thing. If we see that image again of the two of them, she's out there in the robe. It looks like she's the one out there to do the intimidating too, right, according to the government. So why didn't they arrest her? Why? Well, here's why. Because she is one of the key witnesses against Hannah Dugan. She is now talking, and we're seeing this sort of stream of consciousness in the notes from Bill Miston in the courtroom. She says she never would have sent someone down that hallway. She's never done it before. She felt uncomfortable. She thought that Judge Dugan seemed irritated and even seemed to progress into anger. Her testimony right now is crucial testimony for the state. She is testifying against
for the
her judicial colleague. I'm sorry, for the government. I've said that many times. But it is crucial testimony for the government right now that she is offering. And so that's why she wasn't arrested. She is the one who is helping them with their testimony against Judge Dugan.
And we've already heard from some of the federal agents who have testified already this morning that Judge Cervera actually went with them into the offices of Chief Judge Carl Ashley that day. Judge Dugan was the one actually addressing, who seemed more animated in the interactions with the ICE agents and other federal officials there that morning.
I want to point one thing out, because I think we keep talking about this is an unusual case for us to cover because of the circumstances of it being in federal court where there is no video and no audio. But we have Ted Perry, who's at the courthouse, who's in a room where the media can listen to the feed and watch the feed. But what's interesting is we're getting Bill Miston typing us live notes from inside the courtroom. And Ted could hear us on the air reading what we were getting from Bill, and he's at the courthouse, and he said, our feed is 15 seconds behind you.
Well,
so, I mean, that's the logistics here. We're getting up to the moment stuff from Bill Miston right here, and even Ted, who's at the courthouse, isn't hearing it as quickly as we are.
The goal for us was to bring you, our viewers, as close to the moment testimony and coverage. There you go. We're doing just that. Some of the other moments and points that have already come out in the government's questioning of Judge Cervera already. So taking us through what happened that morning of April 18th when Judge Dugan enters Judge Cervera's chambers in courtroom, motions to her to come with her. Judge Cervera, I mentioned this earlier, said she thought something bad had happened, that it was embarrassing for her to be summoned in that way. And then, again, we keep bringing up clothing, it feels like, in this trial, saying that Judge Cervera on the witness stand said she started to unzip her robe, and Judge Dugan told her to leave her robe on, saying that ICE is here, we need to check a warrant, and then they go into that restricted hallway and out into the public hallway where they address some of those federal agents. The government prosecutor also asked Judge Cera about a description of Judge Dugan's demeanor at that moment. Cera said it was urgent. She seemed irritated at this point.
This is interesting, too. We've talked about this whole issue of an administrative warrant versus a judicial warrant. ICE has administrative warrants that they can issue internally for someone's arrest who they believe is in the country illegally, but a judicial warrant is something that is then presented to and signed by a judge. Well, Cera is asked here, she says she hears Judge Dugan ask two of those ICE agents that we see on the bench when they first approach the first two ICE agents. She says Dugan asked if it was a judicial warrant, and the ICE agent said it was administrative. And then, quote, her irritation seemed to progress into anger at that point. Cera says Dugan repeatedly said, it has to be a judicial warrant. It has to be a judicial warrant. It has to be a judicial warrant. She then says, I thought she could have been more diplomatic. So that is sort of the characterization we're getting from the other judge who was there in the hallway with Judge Dugan. She felt that maybe she could have been a little more diplomatic about it, but she definitely was making a point of the type of warrant they were there to present.
And then as it comes back to the part of this trial, right, what Judge Dugan did, was their intention there when it comes to those serious charges of obstruction and concealing an individual to prevent an arrest. We're getting into some of what played out in that surveillance video that we've showed you as well, where so many of those ICE agents, FBI special agents, and more go with Judge Cera actually walking toward Chief Judge Carl Ashley's office. Judge Dugan does not follow them. So Cera is asked right now on the witness stand, where was Judge Dugan? I don't know. Did that surprise you? Yes. So again, we're getting quite a counterpoint here to the actions of Judge Dugan from a fellow Milwaukee County Circuit Court judge.
And she's obviously, we're kind of watching this live. We'll continue to break it down as we get more of the testimony that's coming in from Judge Cera. Prior to this, really everyone we'd heard from was a special agent or a Custom and Border Patrol agent, people who were a part of that team who were there to make the arrest. This is the first witness, I believe. Is that right? This is the first witness
not
we're hearing
associated
from
with law
who's not
enforcement,
part of that law enforcement
that operation, that
enforcement
was
and removal operations team from ICE. So this is the first one. It may not be the crucial witness, but it is certainly a key witness for the government in this case. I think probably we'll expect to hear from some others. I do wonder and I think Julius Kim brought this up, the people who were in the courtroom. Because there were discussions that happened when Judge Dugan was in there and discussions that happened when she left. The 2 minutes and 49 seconds or whatever it was that she was that she was out of the courtroom. That time frame, what was actually happening and what was being said, I think those witnesses, because we heard audio, but the people who were saying those things in that audio, I think, will be crucial.
The technology is also interesting here, too, when it comes to those witnesses, because even the audio that our reporters and the jurors have heard in that courtroom has been at times hard to make out. And the person who was leading that, it was FBI Special Agent Aaron Luker, admitted on the witness stand that they had to do a fair amount of mixing of audio to kind of raise and lower volume levels to try to pull out, and they don't necessarily have who specifically those voices are that we're hearing. So then if we get the witness testimony to kind of corroborate that digital audio recording that's already been used, that might have a little bit more of a backing from the government side trying to make the point of what actually happened, what Judge Dugan may or may not have said in that courtroom.
If you wonder, by the way, how there was an audio recording of this, there was no camera in the courtroom that day, and court proceedings are not always recorded. Some are recorded, especially in cases where there's not a court reporter available, and I don't know if that was the case here, but they had a digital audio recording. It is essentially an audio system that a court reporter can later listen to and do their transcriptions from. I'm not sure if there was a court reporter present that day. There was a digital audio recording, but clearly the quality of that digital audio recording has been an issue at times here.
Yeah, and all of this happening in a courtroom, as we laid out earlier, that has 27-foot tall ceilings. So playing audio, having everyone hear it clearly in that courtroom is actually a physical issue for some of the jurors, has been already. So getting some of that testimony will be interesting over the next stretch. Hey, we're going to try to bring you as many different voices and opinions as we can on this trial, the analysis. We're going to have a great person coming up just after this short break here on the Wisconsin Live Desk. That would be Jim Santel, another legal analyst, joining us for some of the breakdown of what is happening, as we keep saying, on a very crucial day. Why don't you tell folks why Santel is such an interesting person to hear from?
Well, he's a former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Wisconsin. He knows every attorney from both sides here in that courtroom, knows them very well. So he has, he knows how their legal minds work. Yeah. He obviously has a view of what he would do if he were in this courtroom. We'll be hearing from him right after this break here on the Wisconsin Live Desk. Judge on trial, day 2. We'll talk to you in a couple of minutes.
Welcome back to the Wisconsin Live Desk. We are halfway through our streaming coverage for you on this Tuesday afternoon. Judge on trial, day 2 of witness testimony here in the Judge Hannah Dugan trial at the federal courthouse in downtown Milwaukee. And we have had a series of people joining us already throughout the first couple hours, but one of the key witnesses, we believe at least, is on the witness stand right now. And that would be one of the other judges at the Milwaukee County Courthouse that day, April 18th last spring, who has been seen in so much of the surveillance video. We knew she was going to be a key witness for the government based on some of their filings in the lead up to the trial. That would be Judge Cera. And as we get more of her testimony, we also want to bring in Jim Santel, pretty much the perfect person you want to talk to during a trial like this, because he's a former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Wisconsin, has been involved in so many cases in that very building where we are all watching or listening or reading updates, as it turns out, on our computer here. So Jim, take us through this day so far. What has stood out to you and why this most recent witness could be so crucial to the government side of things?
Carl, Brian, good to be with you once again. And my takeaway on this, once again, about the big themes that are being presented here by the prosecution. Yesterday was all about setting the stage for this. It was all about talking about intent, geography. My takeaway, my large takeaway from all the agents who've testified up to this point is normalcy. They're talking a lot about the regular protocols that happen when you're conducting these arrests. They're talking about the processes and the normal ways of going about doing this. And what the prosecution's trying to do here is to establish how regular the actions of these 6 agents were at a time when, and contrasting that with what they're depicting as the irregularity and frankly even some of the emotionality of Judge Dugan in response to that. All of the agents this morning talk about respecting the court. They talk about how it was unusual for them to be directed to a chief judge. And specifically, one of them, I believe his name is Philip Baker, testified this morning that these arrests were happening in March and April without incident. We didn't even know about them because they were so regular. And so again, I think there was a very clear thematic presentation here this morning, including now into Judge Cera's testimony about how normal this was and how irregular it was, therefore, for suddenly these 6 agents to confront a circumstance that they've never confronted before. They talked about how they were divided up and the concerns about that. They talked about how it's normal for 6 agents to be there to arrest one person. Talked about the safety and security. All of these things related to sending this message to the jury and, yes, to us as well, that this should have been a routine practice. And their position plainly is that it could have been absent the intervention of the defendant, the judge here. And so that's my big takeaway. Fascinating now that we've got a judge on the stand. How atypical is that? Atypical that we've got a judge who is a defendant, but now we've got a judge also on the stand, a judge who is on the bench right now, for purposes of just making things clear. I practiced in front of Judge Cera as late as a few months ago. I do some volunteer work with the Legal Aid Society and the Guardian Ad Litem office. She was there in children's court until the recent assignment. So I am familiar with her practice. She is, as she has said, a very diplomatic judge. She is attentive to detail. She's focused on what is in front of her, and she is balanced. And I think that's the message that, again, the prosecution is going to try to establish, even through Judge Cera, this normalcy that was disrupted, the theme today, by what happened there in April.
It has to be some kind of situation testifying basically against your own colleague and fellow judge in that U.S. courthouse downtown. To your point, we're trying to bring folks as much of the testimony as it happens here, since we can't actually watch and listen. Judge Cera just noted, to your point, the ICE deportation officer, Joseph Vasconcelos, who was the lead for this operation, already testified himself already today. She just said in testimony that he was cooperative, professional in those interactions. Again, as the government is trying to lay out, like you said, what was normal until all of a sudden it wasn't that day.
You're talking about live testimony, by the way. The quote that I just saw Bill Miston type that came from apparently the mouth of Judge Cera on the stand: judges shouldn't be helping defendants evade arrest. That's a pretty strong statement from a fellow sitting judge.
Right. It certainly is. And again, the prosecution plainly would be embracing that concept. It's almost a mini closing argument, is it not? That's the kind of thing that you're going to hear from the prosecution a couple of days from now in their closing argument. If you've got a witness who also brings with her a great deal of credibility, right? She is introduced as a sitting Wisconsin Circuit Court judge. The presumption is that she doesn't know the law in all areas, but she knows the broad issues, including misdemeanor criminal court, plainly children's court, other things before that. When a judge looks at a jury and says, we have jurisdiction, and yes, we're responsible for managing our courtrooms, but it's also limited, and we should not prevent law enforcement from doing the job that it should do. One of the other agents this morning said that the chief judge also did not tell them that they could not make an arrest, and commented about, all of them commenting about how this is a public forum. The people of Milwaukee County, the people of Wisconsin, own that building. It is public access, as is the federal courthouse where this jury trial is taking place. That sense of understanding what the limits are of judicial action is also now coming through loudly and clearly from Judge Cera.
Jim, I wonder if I can ask this, because on the flip side of this, you talk about that the prosecution is painting this as a normal day. These were the steps we take. We'd made arrests before, but there wasn't really anything normal prior to maybe 2025 about courthouse arrests by ICE in Milwaukee. This was to the point that when a couple of these happened, you have these press releases going out from the chief judge going, hey, this is happening and we're trying to figure it out. So if you're the defense here, is that part of your case, is to go, there was nothing normal about this. This was a new thing, and there was a lot of tension and concern within the courthouse and among judges.
Right, absolutely. You look at the temporal piece on this, and yes, it may be normal for just recent months and during this particular administration of our current president, but it is extraordinary, again, for this kind of thing to happen. And to your very good point, Brian, that's the kind of thing the defense is going to counter and say, normal protocols, process, we have not seen that historically in Milwaukee County. That's, as we talked yesterday, this situation where you hope that the overall sense of the case percolates up when one side paints a picture in this direction, the other side paints a modification of that, and the jury then has to pick and choose between which one of these it wants to select.
Well, let me ask you about those modifications now as well, because we are getting to get a little sense of the defense's counter argument just through cross-examination at this point. And I'll be very curious to hear what the cross-examination of Judge Cera is like momentarily once that begins. But what have you made of the job the defense team has done so far? And we can just mention it again because we have another former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Wisconsin, right, Stephen Biskupik, leading that legal team, although he has not done necessarily a lot of the cross at this point. What have you made of the job they've done and what they are trying to do to chip away at that government argument?
Right. As I said to you yesterday, I have great respect for everybody on all sides. These are excellent attorneys. Steve and I practiced together for many years. He was the presidentially appointed U.S. attorney before I was, and so we all know each other. And again, great honor to be working with them for many years and to continue to be a part of the legal community. I think they're doing a good job. You also want to be respectful as defense counsel, right? You don't want to attack the agents because, again, they are coming from the government. You can identify those areas where their story may have some chinks in it, and there's not a whole lot of that yet. But especially as you go forward, you want to establish your story. And one of the things I also noted, to your very good point, Carl, is just this. It was brief. I think it was fairly fleeting. But defense counsel was asking Philip Jackling about this posting from ICE and specifically online, in which there's a profile pic with a skull and some pill bottles and syringes and someone holding a gun and licking it. And you might think, well, gee, why is that relevant here? Well, because, again, defense counsel, maybe subtly or maybe not so subtly, as we talk about intent of the defendant, also introducing here a little bit about what the intent of the government was here. Is their purpose, as we always promote, I always did, and I know that Steve did, and other U.S. attorneys have done the same thing, this notion that we take no glee. There's nothing happy about criminal investigation and prosecution. There's nothing to celebrate here. There's nothing to make fun of here. And what I see a little bit here is pointing out to the jury that these are officers who may have tried to follow protocol and process, but they're also a part of a system where they're posting things where someone is embracing guns and syringes and suggesting that there is happiness about this. I'll say it on the air right now. I've said it repeatedly. There is nothing joyful about criminal investigation, prosecution. It is all human tragedy from start to finish. Absolutely necessary for the security and safety of our community, but nothing to make fun of here. And I think they deposited a little bit of thought about, okay, if the question is about the defense or the intent of the defendant, let's talk a little bit about what the intent of these agents was. Was it to do law enforcement, or was there some other motive that we do not embrace as a community? Nothing joyful about this. Do a professional job, do it well, but do not be exhilarated or in any way making fun or light of this very serious thing that the community and the federal government has commissioned you to do.
That's a really interesting point. Our Ted Perry earlier noted that as well. I think for all of us, just, an image we were not expecting to see or to hear about in that trial, but specifically the seed possibly that could be planted in those jurors' minds around that image. A great point by you there, Jim. Thank you.
Well, and I think we know that is one of the things that the defense plans to talk about here is what they believe was a biased and rushed investigation. They believe there was a rush to judgment. They believe that there's bias here that plays into it. So maybe that's a small element to plant in the jury's mind now, but I imagine it is a foreshadowing of more that we're going to hear to come from the defense, right?
Right, absolutely. And whether it's to the agents through cross-examination, their own witnesses, some description of when this happened in April and the time of the criminal complaint and the indictment here, that also, they will focus upon, as you just said, Brian, the time period during which this was under investigation before it was charged. And was there a rush even there? Don't be surprised, as we talked yesterday, if, again, this is going to be a difficult issue for the judge to wrestle with, but the extent to which this was a local decision by the U.S. Attorney. At that time, Rick Froling was the interim U.S. Attorney. Now he's the lead prosecutor here and the first assistant. But the extent to which the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. was also a part of that period from the time of the event until the time of the indictment. Judge Edelman may or may not let that kind of thing in, but to the extent that he is at least letting some of it in about where this comes from, what the motives of the federal government are in doing this, the photography of this defendant, showing her plainly in handcuffs, moving her around in the federal courthouse, inside the federal courthouse with ankle shackles on. We'll see if any of that comes in, and also intended to suggest that there is an issue related to the motive of the government. And so this could be met again as the defense case goes forward in the days ahead.
To that point, Jim, there was, I know in the pretrial motions, there was, the defense had brought up its interest in introducing the photograph and the social media post from FBI Director Kash Patel about Hannah Dugan's arrest. There's the image of her arrest, and he's then tweeting about it and then takes it down and then puts it back up. The judge said that was not going to be allowed as evidence. But then there was also a question of whether or not they could talk about the manner of that arrest, and that it was not necessary to arrest her. Instead, they could have just issued a summons for her to come to court. Why did they do it this way versus that? And I believe, if I understand, the judge did say that he would allow some argument on that. I'll have to double check if that's the case. That's my recollection from reading through things. That's what you're talking about, is there could be some defense argument here that this was essentially a what we would call in the industry a perp walk, intended to draw attention to the arrest.
I guess to that end, Jim, and there's also been some discussion, especially from the defense cross-examination already, about just kind of the unknown. We talked about this with Julius Kim, the kind of power or vacuum of decisions or leadership from Judge Carl Ashley, Chief Judge Carl Ashley, about what the policy was at the Milwaukee County Courthouse. Ultimately, does that matter at all to the question of whether or not Judge Hannah Dugan is guilty of these specific acts? Or is that kind of all the surrounding cloud and atmosphere around that time?
I think it's somewhere in between, and maybe more important than we might think right now. We've already got testimony about these agents going to see the chief judge, and they're reporting, of course, that he said, I've got this memorandum, this policy in process, suggesting he may have also shared it with the judges, even though it's not final. That can be important. Why? Because presumably Judge Hannah Dugan also had access to that. What did she know was the policy in practice? So that's why that becomes important. It may well be that coming up very soon after Judge Cera, we may have the chief judge on the stand. We've heard a lot about him and indirectly from him. Again, another extraordinary bit of testimony. If the chief judge of the Milwaukee County Circuit Court takes the stand in this federal trial to testify about, again, his interactions with those agents where they're on the 6th floor in his foyer, he's talking with them, and talking especially, Carl, as you've just said, about the implementation, the still development of this policy. Does that make a difference? The fact that it wasn't finally published, but it was in process and known generally. That will be a source of argument again in both directions. But all of that again going ultimately to the intent of Judge Dugan in doing what she did in mid-April.
This is just fantastic insight happening by the moment here on this Tuesday afternoon. As one of the key witnesses here, Judge Cera is on the witness stand right now. I'm sure you'll be interested to note here, Jim, that man you mentioned, who you know so well, Steve Biskupik, is handling the cross-examination that just began moments ago. We do have to take a short break here, but thought that was notable, and we will continue to bring our viewers the updates from inside of that federal courthouse as the major players are on the witness stand and asking the questions here today in the trial of Judge Hannah Dugan. We'll be right back. Welcome back. It is 2:18 here. Judge on Trial is the name of our special coverage of the trial of Judge Hannah Dugan this week at the federal courthouse in downtown Milwaukee, something that has received national attention ever since her arrest back in April of this year. And this is the beauty of what we can do here on the Wisconsin Live Desk with our streaming coverage of this trial, bringing you analysts who are able to give us such great perspective, like Jim Santel, the former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Wisconsin, so familiar with cases like this, that actual courthouse itself, and our Fox 6 anchor, Ted Perry, who has been listening to this, let's just say, noteworthy testimony already of yet another judge involved here. That would be Judge Cera, who is on the stand testifying, in a sense, against her colleague right now, Judge Hannah Dugan. So we have Jim standing by. Appreciate all the time you've been giving us the last couple days here. Ted, we wanted to start with you, though, and get a little bit of for our viewers here, we're relaying a document that our Bill Miston is updating from inside of that courtroom. You've actually been listening, viewing the testimony of Judge Cera. So what has the tone been? What has this been like? Because at least for us reading this document, it seems like this is some of the most important testimony we've seen so far from the government.
I don't know if the government has someone they consider to be their star witness, but right now she's the leader in the clubhouse because Judge Cera is giving, look, I'm highlighting her emotions right here, everything she had said earlier. She used terms like embarrassed, irritated, abandoned, shocked, and I'll explain all that. But she was basically trying to distance herself from any plan that Judge Hannah Dugan may or may not have had. She felt embarrassed, first of all, to be summoned out of her courtroom. She thought something was amiss, that there was a real emergency afoot. She hesitated to walk outside. She started to take off her robe. Judge Dugan said, no, keep the robe on. Then she said she was uncomfortable when they got into the hallway. And when she was asked why by the government attorney, she said, it's just very unusual for a judge to be in the hallway unless it's for some ceremonial reason to have their robe on. She also mentions the tone that Judge Dugan took with these federal agents, and Cera said she just wanted to try to tone things down, and I just wanted to get back to my courtroom. And later, when she found out that Judge Dugan had started up her docket again, she said, I was irritated. I felt abandoned, like she got to get back to her docket, but I didn't get back to mine. And then when one attorney or one member of the staff came up and said, you're goated now, a reference to her being, the GOAT, the best ever, in reference to helping Eduardo Flores Ruiz get out. She didn't want any part of that. And when another attorney said that I know what you were trying to do, she said, I was shocked. I wasn't trying to do anything. Judges should not be helping defendants escape law enforcement. So those guys are just some of the highlights, but I'd really love to hear James's take on what a strong witness she appears to be already.
Absolutely, Ted, and I think you've captured it well. This is the judge, as I was telling Carl and Brian while you were in the courtroom consuming all this. This is a judge who I hear, even as you're recounting the things that she is saying, she is very balanced. She is one of these folks who will listen to everybody and then make a determination. And this is not a judge who is afraid to make those tough calls, but she also doesn't want to be the focus of things. And what I think we're hearing from her even right now in real time is just absolutely beside herself that she was drawn into this, pulled out of her courtroom, as you just said, Ted, and then even by people in the hallway suggesting that she is a part of this attempt to try to divert what the agents were doing, and expressing not only her own personal dismay, but also, and this is the other thing that's got to land with the jury, and that's why the prosecution, I think, is embracing her testimony so well, that a judge generally, regardless of who that is, whether it's Judge Cera or Judge Ashley, who may be coming up sometime very soon, other judges do not get involved in these kinds of things. Everybody has their role, including the investigators, including those who make the agent arrest, those kinds of things. Make references to the assistant U.S. attorneys and the district attorneys who make decisions about this. If everybody stays in their lane and we all follow the rules, everything works. If we leave those lanes, again, this is my interpretation of what she's offering to the jury, again, through the prosecution theory. If you leave those lanes, that's when confusion starts. And again, we heard yesterday and again this morning, the extent to which these officers felt confused, were not certain what was going on, felt kind of out there without clear direction. And I think Judge Cera, by her balanced and focused testimony and her own discomfort, is affirming implicitly and indirectly the statements made by those 4 agents earlier today.
And one thing that we're paraphrasing here
But
from
even
Bill
more to that
Miston,
point,
Ted, sorry to interrupt, but one of the quotes that I think we will be the big takeaway so far from today from Judge Cera: judges should not be helping defendants evade arrest. Now, Jim, I wanted to ask you this because we're going, as we mentioned before break, cross-examination was beginning with Steve Biskupik handling the cross-examination of Judge Cera. A couple of the things I'd be curious your response to so far that have come up in cross-examination. First of all, notably, let me mention this, that Judge Cera says Judge Dugan never mentioned the stairway, and we know that stairway is so pivotal to this trial in general. And then an interesting back and forth here, Biskupik got Cera to explain that she later Googled that ICE officer's name, and actually her sister, Judge Cera's sister, is a lawyer, typically family cases, but also criminal, and Judge Cera says that she texted her sister to tell her ICE was in the building, admitting that she wanted to warn her in case she had clients coming to the courthouse. What do you make of that? Again, not necessarily directly related to the actions of Judge Dugan, but speaking to the larger atmosphere and issues at the courthouse.
Right. Defense counsel, Steve included, any defense attorney in any case has an obligation to test the government, right? That's what this is all about, to compel the government appropriately to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. What you see there from Steve Biskupik in those 2 instances, and I'm sure there is more, he's looked through all the discovery, this notion that Judge Dugan never talked about the stairway. Why is that important? Well, the defense is going to say if she really meant to send the defendant in her case away and outside of the clutches, if you will, Mr. Eduardo Flores Ruiz, why wouldn't she then direct him down the stairway? She never mentions that. And that suggests that maybe she did not intend for him to get out from under. So it's a good little point, and I suspect we'll hear about it down the road. And then a little bit more pointedly, as you're reporting on this, Carl, we're talking about whether or not this very otherwise compelling and a good witness with a lot of credibility, if she herself was doing something much akin to what her colleague was doing in reaching out to her sister, and therefore normalizing this behavior. Again, a good defense attorney identifies those areas, and I'm sure Steve is not going after Judge Cera with great ferocity. You don't want to do that. I'm sure he's being very respectful, but pointing out that you yourself, Judge Cera, were concerned about arrests. That's also what Steve is saying. That's what my client was also concerned about. And you and she are closer than you might think in terms of your interpretation of what was happening that day. All that, again, for closing argument, but that's what Steve is doing very appropriately. That's what defense counsel should be doing, testing the limits and the bounds of the credibility of any witness, including a judge who brings to the stand an awful lot of credibility from the very start.
I know, Ted, we've still got you hanging on there, and we've got a couple of minutes. We've got to take a break, but I want to ask you, with Judge Cera being the sort of so far star witness, did you, I don't know in the feed you're seeing, if you just see the witness on the stand, if you're seeing the courtroom, but any sense of the attention? I mean, we talked about some of the testimony so far has been maybe a little drier. It was foundational. Now you've got this key witness. Did you notice attention changing? Did you notice people perking up and listening to this witness?
Not necessarily, because the people who are in that courtroom are really into it, and whether you're an observer or part of either the prosecution or the defense. So the monitor that I'm watching on, just to be clear, has 4 camera shots, one of the judge, one of the witness, one of the general courtroom. I should say 3, not 4. And so you can see the people who are in attendance. That's a shot from almost what the judge is saying, right? And then you're seeing also a shot of the judge. There's always a camera on Judge Edelman, and then there's also a camera on the person who is in the witness stand testifying. And when it was Judge Cera, I need to point out, you read the words, and you can see the words. Bill Miston is doing an amazing job of getting every little minutia out there, what's happening. What these words don't express is the sense of real disappointment that Judge Cera had, that she had almost felt like she had been used by the judge to be a prop in whatever was going on there, and she felt irritated and shocked. And she didn't just say those words. She omitted those words. Omitted, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Omitted it. You know what I'm trying to say. The words were quite effusive. Words were quite effusive coming from her, and that you really got a sense of her pain.
Well, the ability to see it, I wish we could. So your descriptions are so helpful because we are flying blind, and you, as I said yesterday, use the term you're Roxanning for us. You're putting it in our ear so we can share it with our viewers. But thank you so much for that, Ted. And I want to thank Jim Santel. You've been great here as well. We look forward to talking to you throughout the rest of this trial as well. We do have to take a break here on the Wisconsin Live Desk, and we have another guest coming up shortly after this. We're going to be talking once again to UWM Professor Emeritus Mordecai Lee. And we'll be right back on the Wisconsin Live Desk in 2 minutes.
Welcome back to our special coverage here on the Wisconsin Live Desk. We are joined by none other than Mordecai Lee. Good to have you here with us. You never know who's going to show up here during our streaming coverage on the Live Desk. Second day of testimony in the trial of Judge Hannah Dugan, the Professor Emeritus over at UWM. Joining us, we're going to get your take on all that has happened on what turns out to be quite a momentous day and afternoon, especially so far. But Ted Perry still standing by, actually inside the federal courthouse downtown Milwaukee. Ted, I know we've talked about a lot in relation to this testimony from Judge Cera, but what else stood out to you? You wanted to mention one other thing?
Well, I not so much about that. I believe you were told that I have an important update, and I do. The second part of my lunch is ready. If Mordecai is just joining us, he should know that I took a ham and cheese sandwich, or a turkey and cheese sandwich, placed it on this radiator when I got here this morning, and you can see the gooey deliciousness of it. Look at that.
Can you hear
Ted, just to explain to Mordecai, because he does not have an earpiece.
He can't hear you.
Basically what's happening is Ted is taking our wonderful coverage of this momentous trial and derailing it for the second time today with a description of his camping methods of heating up a sandwich.
Heating up a ham and cheese sandwich, or turkey and cheese. Ham and cheese, turkey and cheese?
It's turkey and cheese. Some say derailing, others say enhancing. Yeah, others say enhancing. So, okay, I'm going to listen in to Mordecai. I'll let you guys talk to Mordecai, But they asked me if I wanted to stick around for Mordecai, and the answer is yes. I always want to stick around for Mordecai. So go ahead, and I'll pipe in when I want.
Mordecai, just know that Ted is listening as he enjoys a
We're going to come back
here.
to him. He's going to have cast iron coffee pot on that thing.
Let me tell you what I really think of Ted.
Oh, now we'll get the good stuff here. It's on streaming. You can say whatever you want.
Before we ask Mordecai, we talked yesterday about your connection to the judge in this case. Of course, you were his campaign manager way back when he ran for Congress. So we had our Brian McGraham, one of our managers, going back through archives looking for video of Judge
I don't
Edelman.
even know what's coming.
And I think we played that. Did we show some of that yesterday of Judge Edelman way back when? But I think he found some other materials as well. And I don't know if we have any of that handy. No? Did I call you guys out of turn? You don't have it ready to go?
Good.
No, maybe not.
That's probably for the best.
We'll save that. That's a tease ahead for later. There's something else in that video, and it wasn't just Judge Edelman.
All of a sudden, Mordecai cancels his next 3 appearances.
I've got to go.
He hasn't answered a single question. Why did he leave?
All right, we're having some fun.
Oh, wait, here we go. Okay. All right, now I'm told we have the video. Here it is.
Apologies, Mordecai. We might have it after all.
Uh-oh.
So who is that?
Oh, no. Oh, God. Look at... Oh, I only had one forehead.
And Charles Benson, who was TV6 back in the day.
Never say never. But in my case, I
Those
feel I'm
glasses
leaving
look
elected
huge.
office. I don't expect ever
You
again
can't
to be an
hear
elected
yourself?
official. I love public service.
I hear
love
the
working
voice,
for the public
and I
interest.
would
I hope that I'll
eyes
find
closed
various
anywhere, any
outlets,
circumstance,
whether
and
for
it's
my
Mordecai
consulting
Lee.
work or other
Oh,
activities.
God.
Make society a better place.
Movie.
You never go back and watch your own
Right.
movies
Oh, God.
yourselves. All right.
But anyway, all these years later, Mordecai here offering us analysis.
It's a
that you
good
have so
reminder.
many
The cameras
times.
are always rolling. People are always recording at
and
TV stations.
someone's always
too.
saving it.
I'll get to Brian Graham later.
All right, let's get back on track here with some of the news of the day, because it does seem like a lot has happened in this high-profile trial already, with this key witness now being called by the government. Catch us up on what you have been watching, what you have been noting today as you follow along with us.
Carl, my impression is that we've got two audiences who are following this trial. People are pro-Trump and pro-crackdown on illegals, and people are anti-Trump and against the crackdown. And that they're watching the same news, they're listening to the same video, they're reading the same coverage, and they're seeing absolutely different things.
I called it it is sort of a Rorschach test.
Absolutely.
Where you see the same thing, but very different conclusions.
In other words, they can hear some examination, they can hear some testimony, and one side says, yay, my side is winning. The other side said, yay, my side is winning. And that's really what's going to confront the jurors. Certainly, so far, in 2 days of testimony, I think the prosecution has laid out the factual record as much as they can. But facts can be interpreted. And it seems to me that the defense strategy of saying, prove intent. If you can't prove intent by the judge, then everything you've got so far doesn't count. I'm not sure if that's going to wash, but that seems to be their very strict standard.
And I know the judge will give specific jury instructions, but one of the things that was asked in jury selection, a lot of questions were asked about political leanings, because they're trying to filter out for strong political bias from both sides, I would imagine. But nonetheless, since we know political leanings underpin all of this, it takes one person in that courtroom to go, I don't care what the facts say, I'm with Hannah, or I'm against Hannah, or whatever it is. That does seem to be something that I'm sure both sides have to be concerned about.
You know, we've all seen so many movies about juries and jury arguments and stuff like that, that sometimes there's a holdout who sort of goes like this, doesn't care what anybody is saying, doesn't care how they're arguing in the jury room. That person is going to stick to their position. And that's exactly, Brian, your scenario. But generally speaking, in a jury room, they talk to each other, they listen to each other, they argue it out, and usually they come to a consensus. And so it seems to me it's unlikely there's going to be a hung jury, or it's unlikely there'll be a mistrial. I think the jurors will come up with a unanimous decision.
It's interesting your point about the Rorschach test, to use your term, because I feel like so often in these days and age, and certainly in the political climate we're in, it's siloed viewpoints and viewing habits, right? One group watches entirely one side of things and gets what they want to see out of that. One side watches the other and gets exactly what they want to see. In this case, we're watching the same thing. The same reporting is coming, the same testimony is coming, and it's just how you interpret that. So you mentioned kind of wins on both sides. What do you see as some of the wins? Let's start with the government side of it so far today out of some of that testimony.
The government side has been very consistent about telling the story, and telling the story from the point of view of one of the ICE agents, one of the FBI agents, and today from the judge. And the other judge, the one who was a passive participant, and it turns out, based on her testimony, a reluctant participant. And how awkward she felt about it, that she didn't quite know why she was being summoned by Judge Hannah, and Judge Dugan, and she was sort of walking with her, and Judge Dugan told her, keep your robes on. A very important detail, that she doesn't like to wear her robes in the corridor because the corridor is a public place. She has no power in that place. And so I'm guessing that her testimony today is going to be more for the benefit of the prosecution. But on the other hand, the defense is burrowing in on trying to find out what exactly she's saying about what she experienced, and trying to find little inconsistencies both with her testimony and with the testimony of some of the previous ones. For example, earlier today when they asked an agent, in your report you said XYZ, but today you testified you did not see XYZ. And he says, well, I was writing a report about what the team did, and so I included what the team told me. But I think what they're trying to show is somehow a lack of credibility in the report, because some aspects of the report, he concedes openly, he did not personally experience.
One of the things I'm noticing, and I'm watching, the current witness who's on the stand is Sergeant David DeSmet, a sheriff's deputy, Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office. And he's talking a bit right now about an interaction he had with Judge Dugan once he realized there were ICE agents checking in to the courthouse. And Sergeant DeSmet is testifying that he believes Dugan has, or he says that he had observed, had allowed people to be arrested in her court before, but then on the phone with Dugan, she said it was illegal to arrest people in the courtroom. And here's why I bring that up. And we've talked about this before. If the court's cooperative, if the court is saying, sure, we want to help law enforcement make an arrest, they have every right to do so. The question of whether they can make arrests in the courtroom is, can they do it without the permission or cooperation of the court? The court has purview over its own courtroom. So he seems to be suggesting, hey, in other cases, they've let arrests go on. They weren't immigration related, they were something else. And he was surprised at this. That does seem to be a point that we talked earlier to Sheriff. Why am I blanking? Sheriff, Dodge County Sheriff.
Oh yeah, Dale Schmidt.
Dale Schmidt. We talked to Dale Schmidt about this, and he said in Dodge County they're cooperating. Yeah. So I just wonder here how much that plays into the cooperation or lack of, based on the circumstance.
I think what we're seeing is the differences between the judges, and the judges are sort of subtly exposing where they stand, and so they think they could have come into her courtroom and they could have done the arrest. But they did not say that to her, and they did not insist on that prerogative to her. They were sitting in the hallway. They were waiting for the person they wanted to arrest to be in the hallway, and they weren't in any way imposing on her prerogatives. And so it seems to me that that weakens her case, that she had to come out into the public corridor to talk to them. She sends them away, ostensibly to talk to Chief Judge Ashley, and then she's got a split minute. She's got a split minute where she thinks all the agents are in Judge Ashley's office. And she goes back into her courtroom, and based on the testimony so far, she calls this person's case right away.
Which was not the order expected.
Which was not the order, and points them to the hallway. And I think one could interpret that as being deliberate. You could also say, well, what if there was a judge who was pro-Trump? A judge who was pro-Trump could have taken the exact same circumstances and may have acted differently, may have, I don't know, invited the agents into his or her courtroom, may have told the suspect to please stand up, identify himself or herself, and then get arrested. And so we're seeing the discretion that a judge has, and how sort of through the cracks their personal political philosophy seeps out.
It's such an interesting time to be having this discussion, too, because we're now months removed, right? But it goes back to April of this year. That had been basically 3 months since the inauguration at that point, since all of these policies had necessarily changed. And there seems to be, from the testimony that we've gotten today, so much still unknown and unsure direction at the county courthouse on how these were going to happen. Do you see that playing in as a major factor in the ultimate verdict from the jury? Or is that kind of surrounding the fact of what Judge Dugan actually did that day? Because the defense certainly is bringing that up repeatedly, the lack of, I guess, direction from the chief judge.
You know, I think this is almost like Civics 101 or Poli-Sci 101, because what it's showing us is how much discretion presidents have. And that when Biden was president, he did not want arrests in a courthouse unless certain urgent
There's a fairly
details.
high bar
Absolutely.
for those arrests.
And then in comes another president, different party, different political philosophy, and he flips the administrative policy. That's how much power, to use the term that President Trump likes, the deep state has. Yeah. He gets to tell the deep state, sure, go into the courthouse and arrest them. Whereas my predecessor, Mr. Biden, said, don't go into the courthouse. And so when we as voters vote for president, we're not just deciding on Democrat versus Republican or pro-choice versus pro-life. We're deciding on these very minute details of administrative policy that the executive branch has so much discretion to interpret.
And it is not as though this was not something President Trump failed to campaign on. This was something that was a key part of his campaign, is I'm going to do this. Maybe not specifically courthouses, but I'm going to ramp up enforcement on immigration. We need to take a break. We've got Mordecai Lee here. More with him coming up in just a moment. You're watching Judge on Trial from the Wisconsin Live Desk. We'll be right back after this.
We are back here at 2:46 on this Tuesday afternoon. Judge on Trial, our special coverage now into day 2, the afternoon session of the trial of Judge Hannah Dugan there in the federal courthouse. We have Professor Emeritus over at UWM, Mordecai Lee, back with us again today. And Brian, I know you have a question about the larger picture of what this trial could represent.
We've talked a lot about the politics behind the interest in this case, but I am curious, while there are facts that are being discussed and debated in the courtroom that will determine guilt or innocence ultimately in the jury's mind, regardless, depending on how this turns out, what are the political implications nationwide? Does it affect immigration policy? Does it affect, I mean, if Hannah Dugan is acquitted, is that a big, a black mark against the Trump administration's policy. If she is convicted, does it embolden the administration, or does it have little impact at all?
And just as a setup, in case people are not familiar, we've mentioned it a couple times, but this became a national story in large part because of the response of the Trump administration to her actions and to those events that day. FBI Director Kash Patel posted that picture of her in handcuffs leaving the courthouse when she was arrested. The Department of Homeland Security had a post after Eduardo Flores Ruiz was deported saying Judge Hannah Dugan's actions to obstruct this violent criminal's arrest take activist judge to a whole new meaning. So they have made it very clear that she has become a focal point of the administration. So to Brian's point, what happens?
I think this is all politics all the time. In other words, for the next couple of days, it's all process. It's all sort of undetermined. But regardless of the outcome, I think we're going to see politicians exploiting it to their own advantage. For politicians who are Republicans and conservatives, for example, candidate for governor, or maybe candidates for judge in the spring election, I wouldn't be surprised if they start talking publicly or maybe even do TV ads about how they feel about the Dugan case. And this is an example of why they should be fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Why they should be reelected judge. They should be elected judge to a court of appeals, whatever it might be. Because to voters, this is very, very tangible. And so on the one side, on the right, they're going to be talking about how great it was that the administration tried to catch this person, and then whatever the outcome may have been, how they, let's say, love it or hate it. But then on the left, we're going to be seeing the same thing. We're going to be seeing in the spring election for April 2026, we're going to be seeing candidates at least hinting at how they feel about the Dugan trial, and whether they agreed with the position she took, or whether, let's say, they disagreed with if she's convicted or if she's suspended or something like that. But that's all going to be minor because those are nonpartisan elections. This is going to be red meat for the governor's election. There's going to be a primary for governor on the Republican side, the Democratic side in mid-August, then in November. I think all the candidates are going to jump in and they're going to be talking about this, that this is case one about why they should be elected governor.
We've already seen that in some of the questions of the candidates who have announced already.
I think about, though, depending on the outcome, does it change the actual policy? In other words, if she is convicted, do we continue to see, yep, courthouse arrests are fair game? If she is acquitted, maybe we back off out of the courthouse, or does it not really have any impact on that? I guess that remains to be seen.
Right. I think it won't have an impact, and here's why. Because regardless of the arguments that we're hearing over the last 2 days and we'll hear in the next couple of days, nobody is saying that it was illegal to arrest him in the hallway, or it was illegal to try to track him in the hallway, or get on the elevator with him and then try to capture him outside the courthouse. The fact that he wasn't arrested until he was out on the street almost is irrelevant to this story, because they could have arrested him in the corridor, in the hallway, and nobody could make an argument that it was an illegal arrest.
Interesting. And ultimately, too, the sentence maybe doesn't even matter so much as the conviction, guilty or not, because we had Julius Kim on earlier saying, while Judge Dugan faces up to 6 years, $350,000 fine, it's likely even if she was convicted, she wouldn't necessarily see jail time. So interesting to see there. We still have our Ted Perry standing by as we go back and forth. I believe he's finished some of those bites of his sandwich out there at the federal courthouse downtown. But I wanted to do this, Mordecai, because we were chatting just in the commercial break. We wish that you, our viewers, could see what is happening inside that courthouse as well, instead of us kind of relaying the updates from our Bill Miston and from others. And Ted, I know you've mentioned this once already, but it's a fascinating reason that federal court cases do not have audio and video allowed inside. Could you tell us that story again? We're a little bit short on time, but it's a fascinating one.
I can and I will, I promise. First of all, a couple of quick points. One, I love how Radiator Recipe derails the show, but we have time to go back in the Fox 6 yearbook to see a young Mordecai. Okay, fine, fair enough. Can you guys still hear me? I can't hear them. Okay, I'll keep talking. This is good.
Wait, Ted, we'll explain what's happening. The reason you can't hear us, Ted, is because we're cutting our mics here so that Mordecai can hear you. So there you go.
Gotcha. Okay, then I'll get right to the point and I'll ask Mordecai a question, but I will point out the politics of it all because it just came up a few moments ago in the courtroom. Jason Luzak, who is the defense counsel cross-examining the bailiff DeSmet, who you talked about, about the Trump administration and changed ICE policy. Desmet says he does not recall ICE coming into the courthouse in the past. He argues that antennas were up following recent ICE courthouse arrest. So it is interesting. We talk about the politics of all of this. I want to ask Mordecai quickly about Judge Cristela Cervera. You guys talked about Judge Hannah Dugan's reelection possibilities if she makes it out of this thing. She's not up until April of 2028, 7 months before the presidential election. Yes, it's going to be a big gubernatorial question, but Cervera, she was very honest in court today and kind of said, I don't want any part of this. I was dragged into this. What does this do for her political career? Because she comes across as very earnest and very, I wanted to toe the line here, but also if you're a fan of Dugan and what Dugan is alleged to have done, you have Cervera over here taking the kind of the opposite stand.
It was hard for me to hear.
I'll relay what I heard there. And so we chatted a little bit about the political implications. He's curious about Judge Cervera as well, and how that could play into her future, depending what happens in this trial, and the fact that she has proven to be a key witness already in this trial. What does that mean for her political future, her future as a judge here in Milwaukee County?
There's no doubt that the right and the left are going to go after her.
Yeah.
The right, because they liked what he said, and the left, because they hated what she said. And so, inevitably, when she faces the voters for a full term, this is going to be an issue.
Yeah.
Can I add just one sort of piece of historical trivia? The way you guys are watching what the testimony is and then relating it to the public is how Ronald Reagan became famous. Ronald Reagan was a radio broadcaster. He couldn't hear the baseball games, but he used to announce the baseball games based on every pitch that he got over the teletype.
Wow.
And so he made a baseball game feel real. And in a sense, what you guys are doing is the same thing. You're trying to convey to the audience something that you're unable to give directly to the audience.
Small world, my beginnings in broadcasting were in radio, and my dream was to become a baseball broadcaster. Not president of the United States, though. No one wants anything to do with that.
Ted, since we're talking history, we have to have you relay this story to Mordecai here. The reason that we are not hearing, watching what is happening in federal court here in Milwaukee in the year 2025, when we're getting all these updates through our cell phones and everything else, why is that held true over the decades?
I was wondering that as we got into trial ourselves, and I love that Mordecai brought up old Dutch Reagan, because that's the name he often used on the air when he was doing baseball games. All right, guys, you know we don't have cameras in the courtroom? Let's go back to the 1930s, the Lindbergh case. Charles Lindbergh, the most popular man in the country after what he did with an airplane flying at transatlantic. His child was kidnapped, later found murdered. Huge media event. It was called the trial of the century even before it began. And the judge in that case, cameras were not usually allowed. This was the time of newspapers. Radio was just becoming the #1 source of news, but still photography was mostly the norm, not, film cameras, and certainly not live cameras like we have now. But the judge in this case made an agreement with all the old movie reel companies, including Fox Movie Ton, said, look, you can be in here, you can have one in the balcony, one on the ground, but you can't shoot the proceedings, only during recess. Well, in this interchange between the prosecutor and Hauptman, who was eventually found guilty, it was so good the camera operator just started rolling. And within 2 days, that film was at courthouses across the country. The judge was irate, the legal community was irate. That set a precedent for no cameras in the courtroom, which stays in federal courts to this day.
One local point, and that's that the federal courthouse today is just a courthouse. It used to be the federal office building, and all the agencies, in fact, the post office was down in the basement. And when Judge Myron Gordon was appointed by Lyndon Johnson to be a federal judge, he banned cameras from the entire building. Even though, based on what Ted, of course, accurately said, he could have just said, well, of course we're not going to let you televise a courtroom. Yeah. But that's why nobody has repealed Judge Gordon's rule, and that's why there aren't TV cameras anywhere in the federal courthouse.
In the year 2025, as we're bringing you this trial, it's fascinating stuff.
So here we have this really complicated setup, but we're doing our best to bring it all to you.
We're trying for you here on the Wisconsin Live Desk and Fox Local. Ted, thank you for the perspective as always. Mordecai, thank you. We've covered a lot. We've got just a few more seconds. Do we need another footage of old Mordecai? I guess young Mordecai, whatever it is. As we go to break here, maybe we can pull it up one last time. This is the kind of treatment you get here at Fox 6.
This is torture.
It's been really great it's been really great having Mordecai as an analyst here at Fox 6.
Never appear again based on his treatment today.
I'll wear a bag over my head or something like that. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
As always.
All right, we'll take a break and we'll be back. All right, Judge on trial here at the Wisconsin Live Desk. Welcome back. I am Brian Polson, now here with Fox 6 anchor Kim Murphy. Hello, Kim.
Hey, you've been holding it down. So much happening today. Really interesting testimony from a fellow judge.
So for the last few hours, knowing you were going to come on here, have you been watching some of this testimony come in? And what has stood out for you?
Well, the fact that you have a judge that says, I didn't know what was going on. Hannah Dugan really didn't say why I needed to take this, ICE agent down to the chief judge's office. She was very urgent about it. It just kind of sets this tone of, I didn't know what was going on. I was just following kind of instructions.
If you look at the video, I think about the image you get of the two judges in robes together and they're pointing, you've got to go down here. And I think at one point, Judge Cera even also kind of points, yeah, that's the way to the chief judge's office. It would be easy, because you don't hear audio. Mm-hmm. It would be easy to go, oh, she's in on it with her. They're both trying to do this. And she's coming on the stand going today, I wanted nothing to do with this.
Dugan came into my office and said, hey, I need you to, which is interesting because this is day 2. So day 1, we saw the video. And again, you could interpret that that's what was going on, that you have these two judges, discussing how to handle this ICE detainment, but we're hearing something different.
If we can, maybe play the video that we have. We've put together sort of a chronology of these events. We've been talking so much about them. I think it's really helpful to see what happened. And you'll see Judge Cera in the middle of this. If we have that ready to play, it starts with the arrival of ICE agents. You see them getting off the elevator. That's the first two who come off the elevator, and they end up sitting down at a bench across from a bank of elevators that's right outside Judge Dugan's courtroom. So they sit, they're kind of looking at their phones. They both got their ball caps on. Now, this takes a little while for the video to play through, but we have Eduardo Flores Ruiz, who was arriving at the courthouse a little before 8:30. I think it was around 8:15 in the morning. And he comes through security and comes up to the 6th floor. There's already ICE agents that are waiting there for him. I know we've got a little of this to play through. So you're gonna see him come up and see ICE agents on the bench that we showed you, and there's also one in the background. Now this is the basement of the, I think that's the 10th Street exit actually, or entrance of the courthouse. Comes up on the 6th floor, gets off a bank of elevators way on the south end of the building. There's an ICE agent behind him who notices him and is on his phone. We now know they were using the Signal app to communicate with each other. And he's signaling to or writing to these two agents saying, you know, essentially, that's him. He's walking down the hallway with his attorney. And we haven't gotten or heard her testimony yet, but as a public defender, and I always keep forgetting her name, I've got to find it here. That is Mercedes De La Rosa. So they come past and the ICE agents notice the two of them coming past. This next piece of video is actually edited slightly out of sequence here, but you're going to see Mercedes De La Rosa waiting for her client to arrive, and there's a public defender standing there with her and another who approaches. They've noticed the ICE agents in the hallway, and they're telling her about that, and I think they may go in and say something to the court clerk about the ICE agents. Now we go back to, she's gotten her client. This is Eduardo Flores Ruiz going into the courtroom. And shortly thereafter, Judge Hannah Dugan and there's Judge Cera coming out with Hannah Dugan. They've got the robes on. We heard in testimony today Judge Cera say, other than ceremonial situations, there's never a time she's worn her robe out into the hallway. She thought it was a very unusual request. And she actually felt embarrassed being pulled off of the stand. She was actually on the bench when hearing cases when Judge Dugan came in and said, I need you to come out here with me. This is what we're talking about, Kim. If you look at this video, it looks like they're working together.
Exactly.
And that I think
she's aware of what's going on, and we heard from her testimony, Severa saying that I really didn't. A fellow judge came in and said, hey, I need you, follow me, take this, ICE agent, direct him to the chief judge. So that's very interesting. And also yesterday's testimony and a little bit this morning, we're hearing about ICE, the preparation for this detainment, that there was a lot of planning on the team that would be at the courthouse. There were plans made that this would be as least disruptive as possible. They weren't wearing any kind of identification.
Yeah, they were undercover effectively, right? Plain clothes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the disruption came, the government is saying, when Judge Dugan approached the agents. And that is when, this all kind of fell apart. But that this was supposed to be an orderly operation, no impairments to the public, no chilling effect on what was going on in the courthouse, which is one of the arguments that Dugan's team is saying, is that this could have a chilling effect if people don't feel safe coming to court.
One of the things that the federal policy that the Trump administration created in January, one of his first acts actually as president, was this policy on making arrests in the courthouse. And that policy said that it was preferable to do it in non-public areas out of view with cooperation of court staff. But here we have a court staff or judge who doesn't want to cooperate with that. So that, okay, we're going to come here, we're going to do this arrest. Now, one of the things the defense is saying is the agents never went in and said, hey, Judge Dugan, we'd like to make this arrest. Never giving her really that opportunity.
And the plan was not to make the arrest inside the courtroom.
Right.
It was to wait until the proceedings were done, that Ruiz was out of court, and then make the arrest when he was in the public hallway.
Right. Here we have a reporter from WFLD in Chicago who is here to join us.
Schutz is joining us from FLD, the political reporter there. Paris.
Hey, how are you?
Hi, thanks for joining us here on the Wisconsin Live Desk. So what are your takeaways so far on day two?
Of the Judge Dugan trial? Mm-hmm. Well, we've been watching from afar here. I've kind of been focusing on what's happening in Illinois here, and we've had Mr. Bavino, Greg Bavino from Customs and Border Patrol, coming back into this market after he had left to go to Charlotte in the north New Orleans. It's causing quite a stir here today. He's commander of Customs and Border Patrol. He's been very controversial and high profile. So I have to admit, I haven't followed the Judge Dugan case closely beyond what I've been listening to with you. And all I'll say is that it's one of the reasons that in Illinois, Governor Pritzker in the General Assembly passed a law to just codify keeping federal agents away from courthouses because they wanted to avoid this whole situation that you're seeing play out in court now. And one of the big concerns is, family law and domestic violence cases. They fear that people might not come forward. They might not come to their hearings if they're afraid that federal immigration agents are going to be hanging out there. But also just regular court proceedings, normal ICE immigration court proceedings. They wanted to see if they could pass a law that would protect those areas, although the federal government has said many times that federal law trumps state law and that they don't have to abide by those things. Obviously, as you saw in Judge Dugan's case in Wisconsin, the federal agents were purposefully there at that courtroom. And it's interesting that the government is arguing that they were doing everything by the book, and it was the judge appearing in her robe outside of her quarters, outside of her courtroom, and that's when things started to go awry. But I think the consensus here in Illinois is that they want to avoid the situation of federal officials being there to begin with. Because just watching your video, clearly it's causing a stir. Clearly people, clerks, and everyone in the courtroom, trying to figure out how to manage this and how to handle this.
Paris, I know that here in Wisconsin, well, actually, we've talked about the Trump administration policy that began in January that opened up these arrests, opened the door to arrests in courthouses. But that policy left the door open for local and state laws that would be different from that. It seems that that's what's happening in Illinois. Can you talk about what it was that Governor Pritzker signed that makes the situation in Illinois so different from what we have right now here in Wisconsin?
Yeah, that bill basically saying, codifying it, they can't go into courthouses. They can't even be on the grounds of courthouses. They cannot be conducting immigration enforcement in those areas. Also, hospitals, that was another, hospitals, child care centers, because it's in response to actual enforcement that did happen in those places. So one, in a hospital, a Chicago City Council member was arrested and detained because they were in the hospital with, we suspect to be an immigrant, and the agents were going to the hospital to try and complete an action with that person. And the older person, the city council member, was saying, you can't come in here, this is a hospital. So the bill is basically saying if they're going to come into a hospital, immigration agents, that is, there has to be some kind of liaison that deals with them. They can't just come back, and they cannot impede the work of doctors and nurses. And then in the case of child care, there was a high-profile case of a child care center, a bilingual child care center, where agents had gone inside and detained a teacher there after they say she had evaded a traffic stop and then had barricaded herself in that building. But we did talk to parents that day that said their kids were terrified. They were terrified. The agents did go room to room, kind of looking for this person and then, conducting this action in front of toddlers and little kids. And so the law is banning the action from happening in those places as well. So that's what, again, though, the federal government and Department of Homeland Security have said, we don't have to abide by these things. The federal law is clear in that we have the right to enforce the nation's immigration laws.
What I'm reading, this is the memo that was issued by Immigrations and Customs Enforcement on January 21st, I believe it was, of 2025, so the day after the second inauguration of President Trump. And it says in one section here, ICE officers or agents may conduct civil immigration enforcement actions in or near courthouses, but it says, except when actions are precluded by laws imposed by the jurisdiction in which the enforcement will take place. That seems to open the door for something like in Illinois, but the political reality in Illinois is very different from Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, it seems like, if I'm reading this right, the legislature could pass a law that says no ICE arrests in courthouses, but we have a Republican-controlled legislature here that would be probably unlikely to do that. Is that really kind of the difference right now between what's happening in Wisconsin and Illinois?
It's Democratic supermajorities in Illinois and a Democratic governor. I know there's a Democratic governor in Wisconsin, but it's more of a divided government. And sure, it seems like the political reality would preclude that from happening in Wisconsin. But I have to say that what you read there, and I does it say anything? Because the high-profile raids that we've seen have not come from ICE. They've come from Customs and Border Patrol. So which is the agency typically tasked with being at the border. ICE has done intercity operations for years, and ICE, from what we've seen for the most part, has adhered to those kinds of things. It's Customs and Border Patrol that have done these more egregious, high-profile actions in these places that we mentioned, and they're the ones that have said, well, we don't have to pay attention to these state or local laws because we have a duty to enforce the nation's immigration law. And what they say is, like in the case of the person going into the child care facility, that they had tried to stop the person at a traffic stop, and the person had evaded the traffic stop. So they say it gave them the jurisdiction to go into that child care facility. So it's interesting. And there's this kind of, I think, a divide here. I mean, ICE does carry that. We have seen them do things for the most part the way they've always done things, very targeted enforcement. Customs and Border Patrol has been much different. The things that have wound up in federal lawsuits have been largely at the hands of Customs and Border Patrol officials. So I'd be curious to know whether it's CBP that has decided that, you know, they can perhaps go above what the law, the guidelines that you read there.
Well, and for what it's worth, these are guidelines. They don't have the force of law. This is guidance from ICE, so it isn't really a test between whether or not the federal law would supersede what's going on in Illinois. Yeah.
But the point there is that ICE and CBP are different agencies. Certainly they work together, but there has been this tension in terms of CBP. When you heard Stephen Miller in the White House say, go to Home Depot, it was really CBP and Commander Bavino that adhered to that message and said, well, we'll do those things. Because ICE has typically found that not to be effective enforcement. They've tried to carry out targeted enforcement. So that might be where the divide is, where it's CBP that does these things. And this is kind of the thing that we've had to watch here in Chicago is I just kind of use the blanket federal immigration agents because ICE has told me many times we don't want to be confused with Customs and Border Patrol. They're their own thing. You know, they have their own mission that they're carrying out that sometimes comes together with ours, but sometimes is done very differently.
Harris, let me ask you, what is the likelihood that this law is going to be challenged in the courts?
Well, that's a good question. I haven't seen any indication that the federal government's going to go to court over this. All they have said in terms of official DHS statements is that they reserve the right to carry out the nation's immigration laws. And if that means going into a courthouse or going into a hospital or a child care center, you know, they believe they have the jurisdiction to do that under the law. And so we have not seen a test of that yet because, you know, Customs and Border Patrol drew down a lot of their resources here after Operation Midway Blitz, and they relocated to Charlotte and then New Orleans. But now, today, for the first time, we see Commander Bavino back in a very immigrant-heavy part of the city, Little Village, conducting these enforcement operations. So this is where we might see that federal versus state jurisdiction clash. And one more point here is the city of Chicago, you know, passed its own ordinance saying, you know, certain areas, you know, city buildings, city government buildings are going to be off limits. And also, if a private business would like to apply to get a sign that says we're an ICE-free zone from the city, they can do that. And DHS basically said this is little more than a piece of paper. We don't have to abide by that.
I believe we have our political reporter, Jason Calvi, who might be joined in here as well. Jason, if you could hear me, wanted to see if you had any questions for Paris and kind of what's going on in Illinois versus what we're seeing here in Wisconsin with immigration enforcement. Jason, are you there?
Hey guys, great to be on. Yeah, I'm at the county courthouse here in Milwaukee County, and this hallway I'm standing in is the hallway where all of the allegations against Judge Dugan took place, as well as in her courtroom, which is right over this corner here. Let's see, there we go. Ooh, there's a really wicked delay here. Yeah, so this is Judge Dugan's courtroom here. And if I swing the camera over a little bit, you can see this is that non-public doorway here that the surveillance video shows Eduardo Flores Ruiz, the immigrant at the center of this case, going through that doorway. According to prosecutors, Judge Dugan escorted Eduardo Flores Ruiz and his public defender to the non-public hallway. That public hallway is the center of a lot of the debate here. And during the testimony, Judge Cera testified today in federal court and said that she was asked, have you ever allowed a criminal defendant to use that that restricted hallway? And the answer there was no.
So, Jason, let's talk about Judge Cera. This was in the last hour testified. This is when the defense was cross-examining her. She testified that she actually alerted her sister, who is a lawyer, that ICE was in the building, and admitted it was to warn her sister in case she had clients.
Yeah, that was part of the testimony today. She was asked about those text messages that she sent to her sister, warning her that ICE was in the building. This was April 18th. This was several months into the new Trump administration, the second term of President Donald Trump, and lots of questions were swirling inside this courthouse because there were two previous arrests taking place, one in April, one in March, where two people coming to court were arrested, one after a court hearing and the other, I believe, before the court hearing here. And so it really led to a lot of discussion at the courthouse about what was happening. Right behind me here, through that double set of doors there, is the Chief Judge Carl Ashley's office. And when Judge Dugan, according to the federal agents, they were ordered to go speak to the Chief Judge. Judge Dugan ordered them to go speak to the Chief Judge. He explained to them that he was working on a policy, that policy about how and where ICE can safely arrest people inside of this courthouse has been in draft form now for more than 7 months. It's still a draft. It's not likely to be done. He told me last week that it might be a few more weeks. So likely after this trial would be when exactly he would be potentially releasing this publicly, which has been in draft form now for 7 months. And it was also brought up in the testimony today. It was looking at what were sort of policy guidelines in place, even if it was a draft back on April 18th in this hallway when Judge Dugan is alleged to have helped this person.
So let me ask you just one more question on Judge Cera, because it's interesting. Like, I'm trying to figure out where she lands on this. We hear that she's like, it's unusual for a judge to be outside of the court in a robe. That struck me as odd. It struck me as odd that Judge Dugan came into my courtroom. But then you have this other information that she testifies to, that she alerted her sister that ICE was in the building. And then she goes back and says, I was mortified that someone might think that she was involved in helping Flores Ruiz leave the court through a restricted hallway. So who is she benefiting? Which side? Is it the government or is it the defense?
Let the jurors decide that, but it seems to me, looking at what she stated, it really does help the prosecution, right? This idea that she felt she felt uncomfortable, she said in the trial today, felt uncomfortable going out into the public hallway in her robe. She said they don't wear the robes. It's a sign of authority. They don't wear it in the public hallway. Judge Cera said at one point when she was going back into her courtroom, she went through Judge Dugan's courtroom to enter. There's back rooms here to go to her courtroom. She said she didn't want to walk through the public hallway around her courtroom because she didn't want to interact with litigants. She has to judge these cases, and she didn't want to have any interactions with any of those people that might be in her court that day. So she said she felt uncomfortable. She said when Judge Dugan motioned to her to leave her courtroom, she said she felt that was embarrassing. And then she went into her chambers and she said, to unzip her robe. And she said Judge Dugan told her, do not unzip the robe. And so they did come out here in that video that you're going to see. You see those two judges in their black robes in this public hallway talking to those federal agents.
I think we still have Paris from Chicago online. Paris, I want to ask you, because you talk about the new law there in Illinois that prevents these arrests at the courthouses in Illinois. What I want to know is, in the case here in Wisconsin, the ICE agents eventually end up arresting Eduardo Flores Ruiz outside the courthouse. I'm wondering, does the law there prevent them from coming into courthouses undercover, sitting in, watching a case, following someone outside and arresting them outside a courthouse in Illinois? Where is the line drawn on what can happen there in the state of Illinois now?
I think it's in the interpretation of the law. So it basically says that they cannot conduct their enforcement action. So if you define that as conducting an enforcement action, then it would fall, within the law that they can't come in and just sit undercover, and then that it would run afoul of the law. But all these things have not been tested, and that's where the rubber is going to meet the road. Is if Customs and Border Patrol or ICE come into these courthouse facilities and attempt to do what they did there clearly, whether or not the federal government's going to sue to stop this, whether or not the city's going to sue. I mean, there've been plenty of lawsuits that people here have filed federally against immigration officials that have not been dismissed, and they have in many ways resulted in injunctions. So the federal courts here have tended to fall in favor of the city of Chicago and enacting the restrictions. One other difference here, I think, in Illinois than Wisconsin is there's the Trust Act in Illinois, which is basically what's been referred to as a sanctuary law, and basically the Trust Act already kind of has spelled out those kinds of things where they can't conduct it. Well, mainly the thing is that local law enforcement cannot share immigration status or information with federal immigration officials unless there is a judicial warrant for someone's arrest. So that's the other thing that the federal government has tried to sue Illinois and Chicago based on, and the state and city have won. Basically, these laws have been upheld as constitutional. So these protections have already existed in Illinois, where there are off-limit zones, where there are things that local law enforcement can't do, and it really hasn't impeded immigration enforcement from going where they want to go and doing what they want to do, although they'll say we wouldn't have to be so aggressive if you didn't have these sanctuary protections on the books. We could just cooperate and you could tell us where these people are and we would go get them. But that's not the way it's played out here. The other thing is the data shows, federal data from DHS shows that the vast majority of those that have been taken have not had criminal records. And that's what they've said, that they were focusing on, the violent criminals. It's not been the case in terms of who's been detained here in Operation Midway Blitz. Right. So so the Trust Act has been challenged. It's not really adhered to by federal agents, but what's going to be the recourse? And so if this state law is challenged, what will the recourse be? I don't really know. I think it acts more as a guideline then, because again, they laughed at the Chicago attempted ordinance here to have off-limit zones, and they said we're not going to abide by that.
All right, Paris Schutz or Schutz? I didn't get that.
Schutz. Yep.
There we go.
Got it.
With WFLE in Chicago, thank you for being here at the Wisconsin Live Desk. We do need to take a break. We're going to come back with a lot more. We've got another 35 minutes before we take you to Fox 6 News at 4, 5, and 6. Stick around. Kim Murphy, Brian Polson. We'll be back in a minute.
And welcome back to our special coverage of the federal trial of Judge Hannah Dugan. Testimony continues for day 2. So far, 4 agents were a part of the team assigned to arrest Eduardo Flores Ruiz did testify this morning. And also the prosecution is now saying that, the judge was helping Flores Ruiz evade agents on that day on April 18th. We saw the video yesterday, and today we're getting a little more context as to what was actually going on in the hallway with those 2 judges.
Yeah, and if you're just joining us, yesterday there were only 2 witnesses on the stand. One actually only got the direct examination and actually finished up today with cross-examination. Seems like we've seen some more movement today in terms of more people coming on the stand. There were a few more, as you mentioned, of those ICE agents or people who are part of that ICE enforcement team, FBI, and a Customs and Border Patrol agent. But really the big witness today, I mean, if there was a star witness so far, it is the judge in the neighboring courtroom to Hannah Dugan. That is Judge Cera. Kim, I know you were kind of watching we're all watching as the testimony comes in from Bill Missen's fingers. It's like we're watching video through Bill's fingers.
Exactly.
So Bill, thank you for all of your notations, and he's doing such a great job with that. What really stood out to you as you read some of that stuff coming in?
Again, we're getting more context as to what was happening. You see the video and you think everything is cut and dry. We see the 2 judges, we see the ICE enforcement agents, and then we see them leave. But what we're hearing from Judge Cera is that Judge Dugan entered her court, which is unusual, and was in her robe, which is unusual. And the 2 of them went out into the hall because Judge Dugan enlisted her to help. She
just kind of said, come with me. She didn't say why, right?
Right.
Yeah.
She didn't see any of the warrants that were in effect there, but just direct them to the chief judge. So Judge Cera said, I had no idea. I'm horrified that anyone would think that I was complicit in trying to help Mr. Ruiz Flores evade detainment. And so we heard that. But then by her own admission, she also had some concerns about ICE being in the building, that she went so far as to text her sister, who's a lawyer, to say, hey, ICE is here. And if you have clients, you just want to be aware.
Some of the quotes that come from her testimony, I think, are things that we're going to hear repeated in closing arguments from the prosecution. And I think one of probably the key ones, we've talked about that non-public hallway, the restricted hallway that the jury uses to come in and out when they come into the courtroom. And then that particular hallway that Eduardo Flores Ruiz left, he went out the back door of her courtroom at her direction and then came back through this hallway. We heard Judge Cera asked by the prosecution, would you ever or have you ever sent a criminal defendant through that private or non-public hallway to exit? And she said no. Yeah. She'd never done that before. And she then followed that up with a statement. I'm looking for the exact quote here, but I think it was the quote of the day in terms of the state trying to make its point. I don't have it. If you were, that's not the one. Essentially, I was looking for the exact quote, the direct quote, but it was when she said she didn't believe judges should be helping defendants evade authorities.
So, help me with this. Remind me. We think that this trial could wrap up in 1 week. Where are we? Are we still kind of on schedule?
It's seeming less and less likely that that's going to happen. We know that at pretrial, the prosecution said they thought they had about 4 days worth of witnesses. So they thought they could maybe wrap up on Thursday, but it seems like early on maybe the pace wasn't moving at that which was originally expected. And then we don't know how long the defense would go, but the judge said he was hoping this would be a 4 to 5 day trial. We're hearing from sources and we have some really, really powerful, well-known attorneys that are buzzing all around that courthouse, including those that are on both the prosecution and defense teams. And we're hearing from some who know well, they say, there's no way this thing's wrapping up this week.
And yesterday, if this is any indication, they ended about 5 o'clock. And called it. There was another witness that was going to take the stand, and the judge said, hey, you know what, this is, before we begin with this new witness, let's just, break for the day and resume on day 2. So I don't know if that's going to be the case again today, that 5 o'clock is around the witching hour where they hope to wrap for the day, but, we're getting kind of close to that.
So we had Judge Cera who was on, and after her there was a Milwaukee County Sheriff's deputy who testified about some of the interactions with Judge Dugan, expectations of whether or not an arrest could take place in the courtroom or outside the courtroom. And now I believe there is another ICE Assistant Field Operations Director who was on the stand. If you look at the bottom of your screen, we are keeping you apprised of who's currently on the stand with that banner, so you can see right now who is testifying. I think this is maybe the 5th or 6th witness so far today. They told jurors originally, Kim, when they were going through jury, voir dire, the questionnaires, that they named 26 witnesses. Do you know any of these people? We've gotten through 5 or 6, maybe 7.
Right.
I don't know if they're going to call all 26, but it just feels like we're going to be here a while.
And it's interesting, if you do not have the Fox Local app, really, I encourage you, this is the time to get it, because we also have our digital team in the courtroom, and they are taking the most detailed notes of who's on the stand, what they're saying, what they're, because we're not allowed to have cameras inside the courtroom. We're not allowed to stream any of the audio. So really, our reporters who are in the courtroom, our digital producers who are in the courtroom, they are giving you up-to-the-minute updates on what's being said, the questions, the responses, and it's just fascinating to get some of these details that we might not otherwise get.
Well, they've got timestamps that you'll see in this live blog that was just up on your screen. You can go to fox6now.com as well and get this live blog. But you're getting these updates timestamped as to what's going on in the courtroom. And right now we have an ICE field operations person, first name I don't have in front of me, but it's Kobashevsky is the last name.
Cassandra Kobashevsky.
Cassandra Kobashevsky is the one who's on the stand right now. You can read that right now on your screen, how we're getting this sort of narrative format. It's not just in testimony. So our digital team is doing a great job of putting it into a context you could read, you can digest. If you go through all of these from the last 2 days, you will be fully up to speed on what's going on in this courtroom. So make sure that you check that out, and it's available. It's going to be going on each and every day of this trial.
So I'm going to pick your brain for the viewers here who are just joining us and kind of getting the playbook, as it were. The federal jury, give me a little insight of who these people are. They're not necessarily local people.
Well, they're within the Eastern District of Wisconsin, but not necessarily. Like, we're used to Milwaukee County Courthouse, where it's all Milwaukee County residents. The Eastern District of Wisconsin is half of the state of Wisconsin. So the people who are in this jury pool come from counties all around the eastern part of Wisconsin. So it is not just Milwaukee or Milwaukee County. It is people from counties all over the place. We know that when they started with 14, it was 9 women, 5 men. And while they do not take race or ethnicity information down officially from the jurors, based on observations, they appeared to all be white. We don't know anything really more than that. We know that one of them called in sick the first day, so they're down to 13, but I don't know the makeup of the remaining 13. Nonetheless, that's what we know about the jury right now. I do want to take a break, and when we come back, talk a little bit more about not just those jurors, but I want to talk about, we've said many times, that this is a thing that's hard to visualize. I want to go back through the visuals of this. We'll do that in a little bit. And I believe we've got another guest. I think Ted Perry's back out at the federal courthouse as well, and has got more for us. Let's take a break. We'll come back right after this. Welcome back to the Wisconsin Live Desk. Brian Polson here with Kim Murphy. It is day 2 of the trial of Hannah Dugan, federal courthouse in Milwaukee, all surrounding events that took place in the Milwaukee County Courthouse back on April 18th. And we've talked a lot about the testimony and the facts of the case, but it's so hard to really wrap your head around it unless you can see it.
The path,
the path of what happened. And we've shown it before, but if you haven't seen it before, or if you haven't, you want to see it again, we're going to go through this one more time so you can see exactly what happened here. This is something we produced based on blueprints from the Milwaukee County Courthouse 6th floor that were provided by the Milwaukee County Historical Society. And you see on the right side of your screen, that is Judge Hannah Dugan's chambers, courtroom number 615 at the courthouse. There are blue dots in the middle of that is to represent Eduardo Flores Ruiz and his public defender, who were in the courtroom when Judge Hannah Dugan comes back in after she's directed ICE agents to the chief judge's office. The red arrow shows you the direction that the public and criminal defendants would normally take when they exit the courtroom. But instead, according to the government, Hannah Dugan tells them to go out a back door, which is the door that the jury would use. It's right next to those 3 rows of seats. That's where jurors sit during a trial. So that is called the jury door. Well, she sends them out that direction, and they go down a private hallway. The purple dot or blue dot there is Eduardo Flores Ruiz and his attorney, Mercedes De La Rosa. They come to this door here, and this door actually, if they had taken that door, leads to a stairwell to the 5th floor of the courthouse. And according to the government, that's the way Hannah Dugan wanted them to go. At least that's the suggestion they are giving to jurors, that she wanted them to go that way because they would then avoid the ICE agents who were still up in the hallway on the 6th floor. But Mercedes De La Rosa did not know about that door and instead came out into the public hallway with her client. At the time, there were still 4 ICE agents in the chief judge's office, one sitting on the floor just outside that Hannah Dugan had apparently missed, and then one down the hallway who had been in the chief judge's office, but just moments earlier had come back out. That is the one standing over by the elevators, and you can see that De La Rosa, the attorney, and Eduardo Flores Ruiz go walking down the hall, and the agent follows them. They actually go to another bank of elevators on the south end of the courthouse. He follows them outside, and then the agents converge and ultimately arrest Eduardo Flores Ruiz. That hopefully gives you an idea of just the movements that are in question. The motives behind that are really what's on trial.
And what was the time, like 5 minutes? Were you talking this all happened?
I know there was a time period that keeps being referenced of 2 minutes and 39 or 49 seconds, and I believe that was the amount of time between when Hannah Dugan re-entered her courtroom and when Eduardo Flores Ruiz came back out. So this entire time frame, just a few minutes.
So
this did not happen over hours. It was pretty quick.
Right. If you are following on Fox Local and the blog, we just know that the judge, U.S. District Judge Lynn Edelman, has called for a 10-minute break. Perfect time for us to check in with Ted Perry, who is in the media room, and he's been listening to the testimony. Ted Perry, I'm very curious about Judge Cera's testimony and what you heard and her demeanor, her tone. What were some of your insights?
Is anybody else hearing Ted? I'm not hearing Ted right now.
We're working to get your audio, so we're going to check back with you. But Ted is there in the media room listening. And so there's just so many elements to this trial because it is a federal trial and we're not there with our cameras or with our audio. So we are relying on the notes that our producers are taking and then the eyes and ears of our reporters and anchors who are down there. Ted Perry, I was asking about Judge Cera's testimony. She said she was appalled to think that people thought that she aided in someone evading ICE detention. What else did you take away from her testimony?
Indeed. Good question there, Murph. Thank you. And good to be back with you on Wisconsin Live Desk. Earlier, I showed you this. These are some of my notes from today. I've both been writing and writing by hand. And what's highlighted here are her emotions. I'll repeat them. Embarrassed. Why? To even be summoned by Judge Hannah Dugan off of her court docket. She didn't know what was going on, so she left her courtroom, and she said she was embarrassed by that. Later on, she went on to say she was irritated and abandoned, felt like she got
back to her docket. Dugan got back to her docket before Judge Cera had a chance to. And that's when she said she really became irritated and then shocked when she found out that people thought she was part of whatever plan there was. And that still has not been decided on by jurors what the actual intent of Judge Dugan was. But whatever it was, Judge Cera said she was shocked that people were lumping her in with whatever Dugan was trying to pull, because she said judges should not be helping defendants evade law enforcement. And so she wanted no part of it, and she wanted it made very clear that she was pulled out into the hallway. She didn't want to go out in the hallway. She certainly didn't want to go in her robe, which she says is very unusual. And she thought the tone got very hot very quick, that that Judge Dugan elevated things. And she said, I just wanted to get things back down to a normal tone. And that's when she led two of the ICE agents down toward the Chief Judge's chambers.
Ted, I know we've described this before for viewers, but if they're just checking in for the first time on this, the layout of what's going on there for you is there's the courtroom, this 27-foot ceiling, mahogany courtroom, where all of this is taking place. And Bill Miston's in there, and he's taking all of these copious notes that we're watching. And then there's this media room where there's video and audio being piped into. That's where you go and you're watching this sort of thing. And that's like all the way across the courthouse. And then you've got to come down to this other media room, right? No?
Right. Well, yeah, I was going to say, let's be clear about the two different rooms. One, Bill Miston is in the courtroom, and I was just in there until I was summoned to appear with Kim and Brian, and I ran down the stairs. I didn't take the elevator this time. I ran down the stairs.
He was embarrassed.
But
he
yes,
was upset. No,
so
I'm sorry.
embarrassed, upset. Yes. Up on the third floor is where the trial is taking place. And we'll talk about that courtroom in just a second. Just a little bit ways away from that, just down the hall, is the public viewing area, which the media is also invited to sit in. And one floor above is where Bill Miston has been at times when he's not in the courtroom. That's the media workroom, not open to the public. And that's where Bill has been keeping his log and blog or notes, whatever you want to call it. And you cannot broadcast from either one of those two centers that has the in-house feed. You can only broadcast from here, but you do not have the inside feed here in room 190 on the first floor. So I made the analogy, and I apologize for it again because it's not new. It's like having the washing machine on the third floor and the dryer down in the basement.
Part of why I bring that up, though, Ted, is because
it's not easy.
In your journey back and forth through the hallways and corridors, this is a trial that's being watched by some really well-known and high-profile attorneys and other people, and you keep bumping into people along the way. I mean, I think you ran into the current U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Wisconsin, Brad Schimmel. Obviously, he wasn't going to make any comments on this right now, but I mean, you've run into, who else have you been seeing as you're bumping into people back and forth between this room and the courtroom?
Frank Kimball popped into court today.
Goodness.
Frank is of, yes. Frank has been a long-time attorney. In fact, it's his firm that's representing Judge Dugan, so there's not a lot he could say. We were mostly just making small talk about things, but yeah, he wanted to just check on his team a little bit, but he's not sitting up at the table. He was in street clothes, as casual as we are.
Frank Kimball
there are a lot of...
used to be a legal contributor to FOX6.
FOX6,
yeah, for a long time. So interesting that that name, familiar name, is a part of this case.
Well, it is his firm where a lot of these attorneys are from, Masnicka and Lusak, to name just a couple of them.
Ted, I'm curious, are there any other members? I mean, it is a public courtroom. Are you seeing other members of just the general public who are here watching? Are they in that public overflow room? Are there a lot of people who are coming into the courthouse to observe this directly?
There really are. There are more people, I think, in the overflow room because it's a little easier to go in and out. The door is open. You can pop in and out. There's a big, heavy oak door on Judge Edelman's courtroom that you have to open and close. It squeaks a little bit. You don't want to draw attention. You don't want to be disruptive to it. There are people in there. I'm not sure who everybody is in there. There are some members of the media, of course. But there are also, anyone is free to go in. If there's room for you to go in and the room is not at capacity, you could come watch day 3 tomorrow if you wanted to. This is an open building. security is tight, make no bones about it, but it's, you know, it's an open building.
Have the lines been long in the morning to get in? I mean, is it, because I would imagine it's first come, first served. If you wanted to come see this in person as a member of the public, you probably got to get there early, huh?
I would imagine so, but I don't think anyone's been kept out yet. I mean, on opening day, I make it sound like it's a sporting event. On jury selection day last week, we were told there probably wouldn't be any seats in the actual courtroom because of all the 80 prospective jurors that had been called. Well, now we're just down to, well, started with 14, now 13 jurors because of the one who called in sick yesterday. So now it's very odd to look at that jury area and see that empty chair and go, wow, that they can only have one more person call in sick or have to leave the jury for one reason. Then they're just down to 12 and there's no room for error then.
Let's hope not. Okay, I'm looking, again, I'm just glued to our blog here. We had a Milwaukee County Sheriff Sergeant talking about the procedures in the courthouse, and one of the things that the government's in the testimony, he says he was very surprised that Dugan told him that it was illegal to arrest people in the courtroom based on a Supreme Court decision. He said it surprised him and asked her to cite the case so that he could research it and relay the information to deputies. So again, just more and more tidbits of the conversations. Each conversation is important to this.
But on to that point, Kim, Judge Dugan never got back to him, never cited the precedent that she was asking for. So that was interesting that came up. That, well, you know what the government is trying to prove here is that there was no plan in place. Therefore, Dugan can't claim we have a policy. You got to go talk to Judge Ashley. There was a draft of a policy. Was it actually the official policy there? So that's really going to be the sticking point. The government's trying to say, yeah, there was no plan. Therefore, she was not right to tell our agents to go down the hallway and talk to Ashley. The defense is saying, well, a draft of a plan is better than no plan at all, and you guys didn't even check, so therefore it's on you. So you're going to hear more about that policy and that plan. I imagine we're going to hear from Judge Ashley eventually sometime in this trial. We thought it might be today, right after Judge Cera, but that was not the case for whatever reason.
I do think Chief Judge Carl Ashley is going to be another key witness in this case, whether it's for the government or the defense or how that works out, but he's going to be a big player. We're also going to start hearing from people who were inside the courtroom when all of this was going down, including the court clerk and other private practice attorneys, things like that. We need to take a break here on the Wisconsin Live Desk. We're going to do that and come back. We're going to wrap things up here for the last minute to kind of get you back up to speed on what's happened so far today, and then take you to Fox 6 News at 4, 5, and 6 to continue the conversation. Back after this. We're back on the Wisconsin Live Desk. Brian Polson here with Fox 6 News anchor Kim Murphy as we continue to bring you the latest in the trial of Judge Hannah Dugan taking place at the federal courthouse in Milwaukee. She was the Milwaukee County judge accused of helping a man in the country illegally to evade ICE agents at the courthouse. Kim, we're through the second day, just about through the second day of testimony. Anything that's really stood out to you today? I mean, I think it seems like Judge Cera was really the big witness today.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love to see the legal cases play out and how it's building. So first, on day one, we heard from the team, the immigration team that was in the building. We heard from those agents testifying the process that they went through to serve that warrant, the operation. There was an operation that started days before of who would be involved, where this detainment would take place. So we were walked through that path. And now we're getting into what happens next when Judge Dugan makes contact with those members.
Yeah, they came to the courthouse hoping, planning for this sort of quiet operation that would happen. It wouldn't really disrupt much of anything. And then there's these public defenders in the hallway who start taking pictures of them, and they're like, our cover's blown. This isn't going to go well. I think one of the quotes was, I wish I don't have it in front of me. One of the quotes was something, I can't even tell you the full thing, but basically it was, this isn't going to go well, was a paraphrase. And ultimately, Judge Dugan then comes out and confronts them.
In her robe.
In her robe.
Which has been something that's been pointed out.
And with Judge Cera, who's in her robe.
Which is not standard.
We had a viewer, at least that's the testimony right now. We're hearing from Judge Cera, it's not standard. We had a viewer who reached out and said, well, why isn't this other judge also being arrested? Why isn't she being charged? Well, as it turns out, she gets on the stand today and says, I didn't want any part of this. I got summoned by Judge Dugan and didn't even know why. Was going to take off my robe. She said, no, keep it on. Then we're in the hallway, and she later says she was uncomfortable, she was horrified, all these sorts of things.
And Judge Dugan, according to in this testimony, Judge Cera says Judge Dugan tells her then to take the agent down to the chief judge's office, and so she was just doing what she was told. We have reporters covering this from top to bottom, but Ted Perry is in one of the media rooms and was listening to this and the emotion of Judge Cera, that she was upset, that Judge Dugan's tone was urgent, that she was, Judge Cera, trying to de-escalate things. So we're getting, a little bit more insight to what actually we saw in that video.
And I've had people ask, though, then, okay, so it looks so obvious, so what's the defense here? But we're hearing from the defense one of the things, and we don't know what other roads they might take, but one of them is to say, the government's kind of planning an idea of something that could have happened that didn't, and that is, he never took the stairs. And no one has yet said that they heard Judge Dugan say he needs to take the stairs. They keep pointing out the stairs as though if he had taken that, he'd have gotten away. And the defense says he didn't get away, and no one told him to take the stairs. So their defense here is, did she really help him escape? Was she really trying to help him escape? Or was she just handling a situation that was confusing and stressful and had no intention of helping him?
But then we also just had on the stand Milwaukee County Sheriff officer testifying that Judge Dugan says to him, this arrest can't take place. There is
not in the courtroom.
Not in the courtroom. Yeah. There is a Supreme Court decision that says this can't happen in the courtroom. And he's like, well, what case is that? So that I can do some research. And as we heard from Ted,
she didn't get back.
She did not get back to him on that.
I think it'll be really interesting to see who we're going to yet hear from. And I think we talked about Chief Judge Carl Ashley. He didn't have a policy in place other than he said it was a draft policy that was sort of to guide them on how to deal with ICE in the courthouse.
And the policy still has not been finalized. We
still don't have that anything more than a draft policy. Has that draft been shared with other judges? Is it just something he's keeping close to the vest? We don't know. And we've gotten the indication that he's not going to tell us until after this trial. But we may hear more about it if he takes the stand or when he takes the stand.
Thoughts that today would be the day that Judge Ashley took the stand. So
there's still an hour to go. It's unlikely at this point that we're going to hear from him today.
Which brings me back to my question. Do you think we're still on,
It's a good question.
On schedule, or is this going to go
It's always
more
hard
than
to
a
say.
week?
I think we're making educated guesswork, but it feels like it might be a little behind schedule, and I don't know that this thing's going to wrap up by the end of this week. I know there's a lot of people hoping it will, because next week, of course, Christmas week and people start getting into holiday travel. In any case, that's all for us today. We're going to be continuing the conversation on Fox 6 News at 4, 5, and 6. Of course, you can find all of our coverage, including the live blog at fox6now.com with everything coming from the courtroom. And of course, Fox Local app has all kinds of material. And the Fox 6 News Milwaukee YouTube channel has a bunch of clippings and snippets that will help get you up to speed on what's been going on.
Thanks for joining us.
That's
Thank you for letting me hang out this afternoon.
Absolutely.
You'll be back tomorrow.
We'll see you tomorrow.
With stories that matter to you, this is Fox 6 News at 4. With stories that matter to you, this is Fox 6 News at 4.
Now at 4, new video from Glendale police tracking down some suspects involved with reckless driving.
And it is day 2 of testimony in the federal trial of a Milwaukee County judge.
And that is our big story today at 4. Judge Hannah Dugan is now on trial in a federal courtroom. She's accused of trying to help a man evade federal agents while in the Milwaukee County Courthouse.
Oh, did it get interesting today? Eduardo Flores Ruiz, who federal agents say was in the country illegally, was in Judge Dugan's court on other charges. We've got team coverage of everything that happened today. Christina Van Zelst, let's start with you as we're looking at the new picture that's come out of the courtroom from the reporter there. There was some bombshell testimony today. What happened?
Yeah, Ben, a large part of that testimony today was from Judge Cera, whose courtroom is right next to Dugan's. She describes the moments when Dugan learned federal agents were there to arrest Flores Ruiz. Cera testified that Dugan came into her courtroom and motioned her to come with her, saying, quote, "I thought something bad had happened and it was embarrassing to be summoned in that way." Cera said when she started to take off her robe, Dugan told her to leave it on. She testified she wasn't sure why Dugan involved her and that she was hesitant. Cera said when talking to the federal agents, Dugan went from irritated to angry and kept saying they needed a judicial warrant. Cera said she then escorted an agent to the chief judge's office, and when she looked back, Dugan wasn't there. Cera testified Dugan was back already conducting court, and Cera felt, quote, abandoned as she was able to get back.